you. Okay, now can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
there we go. Raise your hand if you've ever done a live on YouTube before. Oh, really, Scott? You have? Okay. Well, Scott, I am going to count on you to kind of walk us through this, because this is my
Don't
first.
count on me for anything. I haven't used this. I haven't used this particular method.
This is new to me, but I think there's all sorts of like really great ways. Like, watch this, for example. If I do this, and I come up here, right, and then I go over here, I can do this and be like, "Hi, I'm Neil Christensen, author of Dark White and Malcolm Karma Cold Turkey," and I have something like this for. Oh goodness, that didn't. I don't like that. I have something like this for everyone that sent me something. So we're good to go on that. So I'm going to turn that off because it's blocking some people, and I will adjust that for future live broadcasts. So the purpose of this, Sophie, you're new to Writers Group. I think
Yes, I
everybody
am.
else here has. Cara, have you ever joined us on Writers Group? I know you've been around.
Nope.
Have you ever?
No,
Okay.
I have not.
So Cara's familiar, but she's never been on. So the idea here is that I host a writers group where, generally speaking, I give a prompt, and the prompt is either like a first line, or it's like a line, right? It could be dialogue, it could be description, but it's like a line of text from a piece, and you can use it as inspiration for a piece. Or I'll give a direction like, "Hey, I want you to write 1,500 words in the second person," and challenge people to do something like hard like that. And then everybody submits their piece, and we read all the pieces, and we discuss the pieces, and we talk about what's working and what's not working, with a focus on craft, right? So like, hey, this wasn't working. What might have made this work better? Like, how could this be solved? And so we just kind of like dig in like that. I've got, what's this? Okay, so I'm learning controls while I'm doing this, just so we know. So that said, tonight we're kind of like testing things out. We're kind of like making sure that this works on YouTube. We've been doing this on TikTok for quite a few years, and so we're moving over here. And I think that this really affords us an opportunity, because TikTok was so restrictive in things you could talk about, things you could say, things you could do on camera. And I think this gives us a much broader opportunity to dive into. I'd like to be able to see like people writing romance pieces with spice and stuff like that, you know. So that being said, we will dive into tonight's submissions. For Cara and Sophie, the way this normally works is you submit a piece. Generally speaking, I will then post the piece on my website so that people can read it ahead of time. Okay. People like to be able to read and get their thoughts together, and like be able to have some critique ready when they come into group. Tonight we're testing, so I didn't really do that. I'm still like updating the website to reflect the new platform. But that being said, when you get here, you have a choice. You can read your piece yourself, or, as some people have been like uncomfortable reading on camera, even if their cameras aren't on, they ask to have their piece read, in which case I will be happy to read your piece. That's why it is submitted ahead of time. But generally speaking, most people want to read their own pieces, but that's like, there's Sean historically did not read his own pieces until recently. Wolf in the beginning did not read his own pieces, although he's incredible at it. And so so there's no like shame in not reading your own piece. But we're going to dive in right away. We're just going to get started and see how this goes. And oh, chat. Oh, Charlotte, I feel like I'm watching a ball drop countdown. Okay. How's it going? Oh, Ash stopped in to say test. Ash did send a piece, and if she is feeling up to it, she'll hop on. Okay, so Sophie, you're brand new. Do you want
Yes.
to read your own piece, or would you like to have your piece read?
I would like to have my piece read.
All right, not a problem. So, I'm gonna switch tabs here, and hopefully this doesn't destroy everything. Uh, please let me know if there's a problem. Okay,
Okay.
everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So let's see here, Sophie. All right. Sophie, this is called A World Within Time. Okay. The landscape you and I live in has seen time pass by with little to no fanfare. It has witnessed tragedies, comedy of errors, and people on their journeys. If the land could speak, it would tell of these stories. So we must imagine a hill overlooking a town and what it has seen. 1858. The earth has seen humanity evolve through time. Imagine a mountain range stretching from the southwestern desert overlooking a small town far below in a valley, the Rio Grande River snaking down through the mountains and heading south on the valley floor, providing fertile banks lush with orchards and farms. Albuquerque, New Mexico was a growing town at the time, with the usual issues that Old West towns in America tended to have at the time. A man of slender build and scruffy features, dressed in black, sat upon a horse on the curve of a mountain overlooking the town far below. He stopped here for a break, and what appeared to be a wagon road crossed behind him and went into the mountains towards the capital. His horse relaxed its head and leaned down to chomp some grass as the rider took out the fixings and started to roll a cigarette. He lit it and took in a deep breath of it, holding it and letting the smoke come out of his nostrils. His name was Dave
Rudaball.
Rudabaugh, and he was a border ruffian and an outlaw of notorious caliber. There was no one else on the wagon road, and he was able to take a breather here, listening to the birds on the wind and deciding what to do. To continue up to the capital city and the towns beyond was his aim. However, these days were tricky for him, and some people saw him as a notorious outlaw, and others saw him as a law dog. Under the order of Black Jack Ketchum, who ran the city of Las Vegas and its quaint streets with an iron thumb, Dave enjoyed working as a law dog, loved the respect he was given, and the fact he got to get into brawls and situations as he is on duty. He loved getting dirty. He loved the fight and knowing the courts were on their side. And no matter how Ketchum ruled and had plans far beyond what Dave knew, he was in it for the long haul. He felt safe with the gang, with badges. He was having the time of his life. The perks beyond the fights were free meals at the saloon and a nice hotel room right on the plaza. So there was always someone around the main plaza when things went wrong, as they did nightly. He was contemplative. Contemplate. I which is contemplative. I know there's a better way to pronounce that. He was contemplative on the hill this day, overlooking the seemingly quiet valley far below, and the winds coming up past him, buffering the rocky hills and giving the falcons above him enough airstream to ride as they looked for their next meal. Dave sighed, adjusting his seat as he finished his smoke and put the thing away. He had a long ride back to Las Vegas, and he had to stop in Santa Fe to do some law work on Ketchum's behalf. He was not one to be part of anyone else's gang. As long as the people he worked with knew he was an independent sort and trusted no one, the better things would go. And Blackjack seemed to understand that. He came from the Civil War days that Dave cut his teeth on, joining a ruffian gang to pillage and plunder the local farms on the war-torn state borders. All this after losing his tough farmer father all too soon, leaving him without a tough hand that the young Dave needed, and attempting a train robbery at the ripe age of 15. It was time to go, and grabbing the reins, he gigged up the horses as he turned the animals' head towards the hill behind him. He started towards the Capitol. As the outlaw turned his horse, a 1950 Studebaker drove past him, the wind of the automobile kicking up dust. 1952. The shiny automobile with its fins and chrome drove past the outlaw and enveloped his memory in a cloud of dust and slid and bounced along the road as it wove its way past the view of now city of Albuquerque, shining like an alien spaceship. Inside, the Morrison family on their way to Albuquerque. The family watched the world outside as if they were in a foreign land. They were from Florida, and the stark landscape of dry, cracked earth and pinyon pine was very different from the humid green they were used to. The father was driving with the kids in the back. A young Jim Morrison had the window seat and was staring out at the landscape in deep thought. This was an experience that would shape his young mind and become a poet and great rock star years down the road. But at the time, he was just enjoying the view. The traffic suddenly came to a sudden stop and then a crawl. The father mumbled under his breath, and they rolled down the windows as they saw the smoke up ahead. The sun was setting as they came to the crash scene. An old Ford truck had barreled straight into a car loaded with Native Americans. The car was totaled, sideswiped and done for, and the group of Navajos were on the side of the road near the crash scene. As the Morrison family slowly passed all of this, Jim's eyes grew wide. Seeing the carnage and the blood pouring into the oil slick on the side of the road, lit up by the setting sun and the caution flares. He had never seen anything like it before and was mesmerized. All right, so now I have to figure out where. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Is this? Okay, there we go. Okay, so Sophie, the way this works is I'm going to give you a little bit of feedback, and then the other people in the group that are here are going to give you feedback. And then at the end of all the feedback, then you have a chance to respond to the feedback. Okay?
Okay.
And real quick, I'm just making sure no one else has joined. Okay. So, in terms of the story, I like what you're doing. I definitely think that this has, it's like it's got a tale to tell. You know what I'm saying? That being said, the entire thing is narration. I don't have any breaks for dialogue. I don't have any point of view. The entire thing is the narrator. And it's fine. You're telling a story, but your reader is going to start feeling a little monotonous. So that's why sometimes we'll drop in even a line or two of dialogue just to break it up, because even as I was reading it, I was like, okay, we're still just telling the reader what is going on. That's my only real criticism of it. I feel like we need to get some point of view in there, to get someone saying something, someone interacting with something, other than just telling us what's going on. There were a few places where I think, and I tripped up on a few of them, where I think you have what amount to typos. And as I was reading it, I was trying to make myself remember where they were. But there's a few places where, like, let me find one. Hold on. This is good TV. As I like go through. Right. So, okay. So this isn't a typo, but this felt very wedged, right? When you're like attempting a train robbery at the ripe age of 15. Like, it just felt like you had a piece of information that you needed to give us, and you were just going to wedge it in there.
Okay.
But where's the one that it was one word that got broken into two words that spell check wouldn't catch because they were both correct words. And I can't find it, but I'm sure one of our other people noticed it and will point it out. But anyway, I like the story you're telling. I'd like to see it told in a more like immersive way. I'd like to see it less just and this is a good start. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Gina Denny's on TikTok. She's like, "Hi, I'm Gina Denny's. I'm a writer, agent, editor, whatever, and I help you make your writing better. Today I'm answering this comment." And her TikToks are like a masterclass in writing. But one of the things she says is like, okay, so you've got a story you want to tell. So the first time you write it down on paper, don't try to write the story like a book. Just write like 500 words like you were telling the story to a friend, right? And then go back and like now make it, instead of 500 words, make it 5,000 words, but still like just like opening it up a bit and just kind of keep opening it like an onion until you get there. So for where we're at with this, I think that, you know, the narrator just kind of telling the story is fine. But as you develop it, I definitely want some POV sooner into the experience. Scott, what would you have to say about it?
So I really wanted to disagree with you because that was our shtick.
Yeah, that's our shtick.
But I think everything you said was pretty spot on. I like one of the things I liked about the opening, the majority of the story, was it felt very sort of Western noir, like Last Man Standing. If you're familiar with that Bruce Willis movie, and if you're not, you should
Yes.
watch it immediately. And I can forgive the lack of dialogue because not every story needs dialogue, but Neil's right. Like, if you open this story up a little bit more, you're going to need some dialogue, even if it's just, like he said, a few lines here or there, a remembered scene, or Jim Morrison. He was the Doors, right?
Yes.
Okay. not a Doors fan. Not again, not it's not that I don't like the Doors, but I'm just not like a huge fan. Like I know a few of their songs, but so this is like if this is like really something that happened, I think that's very cool. Um, even if you took some liberties with it, which I don't know if you did or not, I think it's really interesting to write um, sort of meta fiction like this. Um, I loved the transition, although it needs a little bit of work just to make things a little more clear. I once we got past the transition, I was like, oh, that was like a wipe, like a camera wipe, um, and it made sense. But I think it just a little another pass at that, and it would be perfect. Um, so yeah, I just think it needs some opening up and another pass, and I think it would be a really interesting look into what made a young Jim Morrison start down that road to becoming the influential musician that he did.
All right. Wolf, what do you got?
Okay, bear with me. Wolf is working on his sound as well because he actually has equipment. Let's see. All right. Also, where are these posted? Because I didn't have the piece in front of my face.
Wolf, I didn't post them this week because we're just trying this out. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, normally they'll be posted on my website the way they usually were.
Yeah, it usually just helps me to be able to look at the piece.
Yeah.
I have a couple of notes. So, firstly, I wanted to say that I did like the opening. The ambiance is strong. When you call it the way that you describe the setting, what do you call it? Really helps picture what that setting is and gives you what's the word I'm looking for? A very clear vision of what this looks like. I actually am going to agree with Neil that there was a lot of narration in the piece. And if you are going to do narration, I think that it can work. You have to have strong vocabulary. And I feel like, and of course, it's a rough draft. So we're not going to like harp on it too much. But if you are going to just do full narration, then it has to have very punchy, very strong like vocabulary that draws you in, or else it becomes monotonous. And that's kind of what the piece started to feel like, was monotonous. It was like, then this happened and he was happy, this happened and thing, and happy in those moments are not strong enough to keep the train of narration going on. Revelatory and other strong words would have helped the narration if we were going to not open this up and keep it contained. The talking about vocabulary, there was a use of a word that took me out. I know this is just personal, and I'm being very nitpicky, and I admit that this is very nitpicky, but it was the use of the horse chomping on the grass. It was graze, picked up. I don't know. There was something about chomped that just didn't.
I don't know. I liked Chomped. I thought it was appropriate.
It was cute.
It gave me a picture in my head. It wasn't, the horse wasn't grazing, it was chomping.
Oh my God, yes. As I said before, mine I was very nitpicky, Neil.
Yeah, I know.
And I mean, I'll admit that I'm probably not the audience for this piece, especially with just narration, because I admit that I'm trying to be like, give a disclaimer that I don't particularly care for, and then he was happy about this, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. I need something a little bit stronger to draw me into a piece, and I feel like this just did not draw my attention, and that's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Wolf. Let me figure out how to do this now. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to ask Kara to talk.
Okay, I am also not as useful if I don't have it in front of me. Listening that's not what my brain does. But I will say my general impression was a strong beginning. I also liked the imagery. I live in the Southwest, so I was like, oh, it's like home. It was a good description. But it also started to feel monotonous for me as well as we went on. And I think that is just the continued narration without any real personalization or point of view or dialogue or anything like that. So I don't really have anything new to say. I promise y'all I will do better when I can have the piece in front of me and like make all my notes. But my short-term memories are really bad, and I have to be able to see it. So that's all.
All right. And we do that. And then Ash, what do you got to contribute? Ash?
First off, how's my audio? Is it okay?
You sound great.
Okay, fantastic. I unfortunately was not able to listen to the piece. I apologize. I was trying to figure out how to join. So my apologies. I know we all want as much feedback as possible, but I couldn't give it justice because I wasn't able to listen to the whole piece. So
Not a problem. Not a problem. All right. All right. Well, now, Sophie, this is your chance to kind of like respond to everything that you've heard and
Okay.
talk about what you and correct us where we're wrong.
Okay, so that piece is a preface to this story that I'm working on, a thriller reincarnation story that I have going on. And that's why I didn't have any dialogue. I was just trying to show how time moves forward and, you know, that we're all just here so temporarily. I liked all the feedback. I could add some more dialogue. I know I could. Dialogue is not really my strong suit. I am a filmmaker at heart, and that's why when Scott said the swipe of the Studebaker and the dust of Dave disappearing, I was visualizing it in a filmmaking way. In fact, I'm actually writing the script as I'm writing the novel. So I show more action than I speak, basically. The actual book itself will have a lot more dialogue and have a lot more interaction, definitely. Yeah, but it's just like a teaser to get the reader hooked on where I'm going with it.
All right.
Basically.
Well, thank you for your submission. I hope that what you got was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right. So next up, I'm going to have Scott read his, unless you want it to be read, Scott.
No, I'll read it.
No, that'd be wonderful. Okay.
It needs a little setup. So I wrote a short story a few years ago, and it's basically what if you set all creatures great and small in, which is a British veterinary semi-biography in a D&D setting. And it's kind of my stab at cozy fiction, particularly cozy fantasy. And in that one, he helped a dragon give birth. So this is a new story that I'm working on with the same character, Sir Gerard, and its working title is The Horn of Destiny.
Okay.
Sir Gerard knocked on the small round door, a bouquet of posies in his left hand. His full mustache was waxed to curling points under his prodigious nose, and he had a wide grin underneath that. The woman who answered the door was of the race called halflings by the larger folk. In their own language, they were known as the Hadathir, or true people of the earth. At first, she looked cross, but when she realized who was holding the posies, her face brightened. Well, come on in, dearie. He bowed slightly and handed her the flowers. It is so good to see you again, Gertie. He stepped into the warm and inviting home, the air redolent with spices and cooking fruit. Thankful for his short and stocky nature, he didn't have to stoop or be mindful of beams. Lentils were something he was careful of. Good to see you too, love. Gertie walked over to the buffet and filled a tankard with her mead, famous in all the county and beyond. She handed it to him and only then went to get a vase for the flowers. What brings you this way? And it isn't just to lie in my bed. Gerard still had it in him to blush about such things, but they were both adults, well into their mature years. There is that, Gertie. You're correct, though. I also came this way to get some help. I've heard tell of a unicorn running rampant in a forest a few days' journey from here. I suspect it might be ill. And you need a lass that's pure of body and spirit to act as bait. She returned to her sitting room with a tankard of her own and the vase of posies. The vase went on a runner in the table's middle, the tankard by a place setting on a coaster. Isn't that just an old wives' tale? Gerard winked. As an old wife, wouldn't you know? He took a sip of the mead. There is truth in it, though. It won't work with every unicorn, but I need to have every tool I can to face off against this one. If it's truly gone mad, I'll have to put it down. No lass, pure or otherwise, will help with that. But if it's just sick, a song from a maiden has been known to salve the burning breast of many a wild animal. It worked on you, didn't it? Gertie chuckled. You know it had more to do with the song than any maidenhood you may or may not have had, or you may or may not have possessed. They laughed and drank the mead, sharing old times and new. A dragon birth and saving a clutch of hippogriff eggs from the blight? You have been a busy man. She bit into a cookie from a plate she'd produced a few minutes earlier. Speaking of busy, he looked at her meaningfully. Yes, to business. There is one such lass who lives in our village that possesses both the purity of heart and a spirit of adventure not well known in my people. I will take you to her, and we'll see if she's willing to risk life and limb. They finished their drinks and cookies, only then and reluctantly leaving the comfort of the Hadathir home. Looking over the village was a little like looking over a vista of rolling hummocks leading to larger hills in the distance. The homes were mostly underground, which made for excellent insulation and strength. Windows and doors were round and well inset into the earthen walls. Larger homes belonged to the big families as much as anything truly belonged to anyone in their community. As children grew up and made homes of their own, the parents would move to smaller dwellings to either take care of the elders or simply live in multifamily dwellings. They moved now towards one of the larger homes. The plants and flowers near the doors made a sort of sign if you knew what to look for. The home they approached belonged to the rose thistles. Gerard knocked, and they waited. The door opened to the sound of playing children and laughter. The man of the house answered, puffing on a long-stemmed pipe as he did. And that's all I've got so far.
Well, Scott, you endeared yourself to my heart by writing my favorite genre. Because fantasy and I, we're like that. At least there were no names that I had difficulty like wrapping my brain around.
Yeah, I wanted to stick with traditional, just straight ahead names.
as fantasy goes, for me, this was pleasant. I enjoyed it, and I enjoy the idea of like this idea of a mad unicorn, right? Like like unicorns are just they're like pristine in our mythology, and so the idea of one that has gone rogue or gone mad is actually interesting to me. Um, here's what my criticism is, and it's not, and I don't even think it's really a criticism of your writing. I think it's just me not being in touch with the genre. Like, I understand that there are things that are like small people that we call halflings in all of fantasy genre, and so we have to call them out, like, and say, oh, this is that thing that you know. But man, does it just feel like redundant when I hear it in every, like, oh, like we have to call out who's the elf and who's the like, I don't know. Is there a way in fantasy to like have language that still speaks to your audience, that doesn't feel like it's being lifted out of every other fantasy story that's ever been told? And that is a legitimate question. I don't know, because it's not my genre, and so I'm trying to identify the thing I like and then tell you the thing that I struggle with, and it's not specific to this story. It's just this genre that I struggle with. Now, look, don't get me wrong. Like, you could say the same thing about what I write. Like, Neil, does every character have to be an alcoholic? Neil, does it always have to be raining? Like, I get it, but these are the things that I stumble with. And so I'm going to have Sophie come in, because I think that she's probably a stronger, well, anyone is, but like, I'm assuming Sophie's going to have better things to say than me. So Sophie, what would you like to say?
I really liked it. I don't usually read fantasy, but I loved the second that you said unicorn, I was hooked, and I wanted more. And I want to know what happens when a unicorn goes mad. Like, yeah. It was very interesting. I would like to see more descriptions of the surroundings so that I know what the house looks like, and I can smell the musty bar, or things like that. But other than that, it was beautiful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah.
Ash, what do you have to respond to?
Okay, I apologize. I didn't realize how dark my background was. I actually disagree with Neil about the use of halfling and it being like an overdone thing, or like, is there other language we can use, because it calls to the audience that this piece is intended for, right? To invoke the language that we're all familiar with, right? I also took a note that, like, I loved how you did that as well, right? Mentioning that they were a halfling, but then bringing in some lore that, like, a non-native fantasy reader might not be familiar with. That's the first note I took, is that you use unassuming language so that, a generic audience can understand what this is. Maybe there's something to, like, describing their stature or something that can help so that it doesn't feel so much a cliche, but I don't know that that was needed. I also maybe don't necessarily agree that the piece needed more description about what things looked like. Like, I feel that the descriptions you used were very well done, very sensory oriented, right? Especially the smells of the food cooking, and that bringing in a short side paragraph about the lentils and things like that. I think you did a good job of portraying, like, how things look and how people look. with other sensory details. I'm not really sure that I have any critical feedback, like things to work on. I think it's going in the right direction for if the intention is a cozy D&D inspired story. I think it's going in the right direction, and I couldn't give critical feedback without hearing more, like what's coming next, what the next 1,000 words are. Yeah, it feels in really good shape to me.
All right. Thank you, Ash. Wolf, what is your opinion?
Okay, Wolf is here. So I will give what I liked about this piece. I think that this definitely feels like the background. This is the downtime stuff that we don't get to see in a D&D campaign. So I definitely like that portion. Now, this is the part where Wolf brings in very critical ideas, and Wolf breaks down things that people don't necessarily always agree with, but I will always bring them up. I deeply encourage, even if this is a cozy fiction, to follow some creators, and I'm more than willing to give you some resources of individuals who are little people, because they've actually spoken out about the use of halfling and dwarfism being used as a fantasy race when little people do exist. And so I would really encourage you to seek out those kinds of resources when writing this story, because maybe just making them a little person in a fantasy setting instead of what do you call it, leaning into halflings and dwarfism, which removes little people from being represented in fantasy, might be a better way to go. um, that's always been my platform, is to speak and educate about those things. I'm more than willing to give the resources and the creators who have spoken about these things. um, I don't really have a lot about this piece. I'm a very tactile person, and I like a little tactile. And I mean, I think that I agree with both Ash and Sophie. I think just a touch more detail, but not detail. Actually, there's a difference between detail and specificity. And I think I just want more specificity. What type of flowers? Especially since they are getting flowers for a specific person, having the specificity of the flowers shows the relationship between the two characters by having those little details. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Wolf, for that. And Kara, what are you thinking?
Let's see. I did try to take a couple notes this time. So I love fantasy and I love cozy. And the first note I took was it definitely feels cozy. Like within the first couple of paragraphs, nailed it. You got that feeling down. I liked your dialogue. I giggled at the "as an old wife, wouldn't you know" thing. I'm also intrigued by the unicorn. I don't think I have anything new to say that everyone else hasn't said. I do think that in writing fantasy, it's always that balance of not being too out there and unfamiliar for readers, but also not, doing something original. And that's always a balance you have to try to hit when you're writing fantasy. I really like Wolf's point about little people being in our world, and that's not actually something I've seen anyone speak about. So I'm kind of curious about that now. But yeah, overall, I really, really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to keep reading it, and I want to know what happens with the unicorn. So.
All right. Thank you, Kara. I think at this point, I always try to decide where I'm gonna stick my piece. Like, am I gonna do it first? Am I gonna at the end?
You also often have a habit of not letting me respond to the criticism.
Oh my God, I do. But
Yeah.
that's also because you know what, Scott? You know what? It's because I don't think you have anything worthwhile to say.
I appreciate that.
No, I'm sorry about that, Scott. Go ahead.
Well, I think that the point about detail and specificity is well taken. I tend on first drafts not to include quite as much sensory detail as I will get in later drafts. This is still like raw. I like Wolf's point about small races in fantasy worlds versus little people in the real world. I will point out that Gerard himself is basically a little person. He's a human who is not much bigger than the halflings, so that would put him in the he probably in our world would have dwarfism of some kind. So that if you want to point me to those resources, I would much appreciate it. I would be interesting. It would be interesting to hear those points. I'm glad that I'm hitting the cozy level right, because usually my stories are anything but cozy.
True story.
But I think that I was successful at doing it with I'm not sure how cozy a dragon giving breech birth is, but if any of you are interested in reading the first story with Gerard in it, I can point you in the right direction.
What could be more cozy?
It involves him going like shoulder deep into a dragon's birth canal. But yeah, I really want to stretch myself as a writer and go into new places for me.
I thought dragons laid eggs.
In my world, they are. What is it when they have like they're like in eggs?
Actually,
they
so
like
there
give
are
birth?
lizards who give live birth.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that, but I feel like every fantasy I've ever like encountered where there were dragons, it was like
Let
dragon
Scott do
eggs.
something different. He's cooking.
Right. I had in mind the lizards that like initially their young are in eggs inside the mother, but then when they come out as a live birth. That's a thing that happens. So in any event, yeah, I'm built different. So my stories are built different. But yeah, thank you for the feedback. I definitely am glad to hear other people think I'm kind of headed in the right direction, because I want to make sure this story has humor and has cozy bits, but at the same time, I want to lean into the fact that in some mythologies, unicorns are terrifying. So, especially when they're like essentially rabid, it's not going to be rabies, but it'll be something like that. So, I'll let you guys know when it's finished.
Your writing is always excellent, and even when it's not like my particular path, I still really enjoy it, and you always have good reasoning behind everything that you do. So I try to come at you, and I always end up losing. So I am going to read mine now, just because I have to do it at some point. So this is from my work in progress, Bishop Church, and it's just kind of mid chapter 1. Yeah. So back at my building, I drove around the block a couple times to make sure there weren't any Fed types hanging around all sneaky like. Once I was satisfied, I put the car back in the alley, locked down the boot around my tire, and grabbed the shopping bags from the back seat and headed up the back stairs. I lit up another smoke as I stepped through the door into the hallway and choked on it as predictably, I suppose, there was someone waiting for me outside my apartment. This guy wasn't the same ilk as the goons this morning. He was thin and delicate looking, well dressed in a gray suit, and had shiny, slicked back hair. He leaned nervously against my door jamb until he noticed me, then stood up straight, shoving his hand conspicuously into his trouser pocket. "It's been a long day," I said, approaching my door and the man standing in front of it. "Are you Bishop Church?" He was nervous, agitated, speaking in staccato bursts and shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "It's been a long day, man. Can we maybe do this tomorrow?" "Do what?" he asked, looking confused. I gestured at him. "I don't know. Whatever it is we're about to do, can we do it in the morning?" The left corner of his mouth dropped, and he looked a little defeated. He turned his body slightly like he was going to leave, then stiffened and straightened back up. I saw his right hand ball up in his pocket, and he turned back to me, his face twitching at the edges. "So that's a no," I said. "I want you to stay away from her." I emptied my lungs and dropped to my shoulders. "I'm serious," he spat. "I don't know." He looked me up and down like I was a piece of furniture he was considering buying. "What she sees in you, but she's mine, and we're going to work it out. You need to stay far away from her. Got it?" I didn't know for sure what he was talking about, but considering the day I had a pretty good idea. I glanced at his hands shaking in his pants and his face quickly becoming soaked in nervous sweat. "You're going to shoot yourself in the foot," I said. "What?" he said. I stuck my hand into my jacket to get my keys. The man's face went white and he jerked his right arm up, but his hand got stuck in his pocket and he lost his balance. A loud crack filled the hallway, and the man howled and fell to the floor screaming. "Told you so," I sighed. He was just lying there, holding his foot and screaming. I stuck my key in the door and opened my apartment. "Come on," I said. "Let's get inside. I'm not sure how many gunshots it takes to get the police out here, but we have to be approaching that number now. I'll get that bandaged up for you." He looked at me helplessly, and I bent over and lifted him up and helped him hobble into my place. I set him down on one of the folding chairs, dropped the shopping bag on the floor, and found the switch to turn on the lights. Then he started screaming again. I jumped at the scream and spun around to see the bony man staring at the floor in front of him. I followed his eyes to the bodies waiting to be wrapped and disposed of. "Oh, them," I said, relieved. "Don't worry, they're already dead. Can I get you a drink?" He just sat there moaning and shaking and staring at the floor, mumbling incoherent sounds and bleeding on the clean part of my floor. I set down 2 glasses on the wooden milk crate next to his chair and popped the cap on one of the bottles of whiskey. I filled both glasses halfway, then produced a bottle of rubbing alcohol from under the kitchen sink. I dug around next to my bed and found the cleanest undershirt I could and tore it into 3-inch wide strips. "Drink up," I said with a tone of encouragement. "It'll help with the pain and the shock." He looked at me with unrestrained panic and downed the firewater in one gulp, then slammed the glass down on the milk crate table for another. I refilled his glass 3/4 of the way this time and lifted his right foot and set it in my lap. Gently, I slipped the loafer off his foot and inspected the dime-sized hole that had passed through the top of his shoe and the leather sole. "You see," I said with a smile, "that's why you carry your gun in your jacket and not in your trousers." He tried to smile, but could only manage a grimace. "Don't worry. I know plenty of gents walking around with a limp for just the same reason. You're not alone. You'll excuse me if I don't find that altogether comforting." I smiled as warmly as I could muster. "I surely will." I filled his glass back up with bourbon and filled the hole in his foot with isopropyl. Then I wrapped his mangled limb in the shredded undershirt parts, making sure not to use the yellowing pit stain parts on the first layer. I went to the kitchen and washed the blood off my hands, dried them on my slacks, and lit a cigarette while I leaned against the counter. So, Twiggy McBadshot, how you feeling? Stupid, he said. Sorry. I laughed and then coughed. Hey, killer, it's your foot. I'm not that good at confrontations, he said. You don't say. What's your name, shooter? He seemed to think about this, deciding whether or not he wanted to share that information with someone like me. Devin, he said. Devin, I probed. Just Devin, he insisted, and I left it alone. All right, just Devin, I said. You want to tell me what I did that deserved you putting a bullet in me? He looked at me like a parent looks at a child who's done something wrong and really should know what that something is. I looked back at him like that child. I shrugged and dragged on my cigarette. Finally, he let out a sigh and capitulated. Penny, he said with irritation that I suspected was masking embarrassment. Oh, I said. Penny. He finished off his glass of whiskey and refilled it himself. In another 5 minutes, he wouldn't even feel the hole in his foot, or a hole in his head for that matter. I found your name and number in her pocketbook, he said. And you assumed... And I followed her, he said. This morning, I followed her here. I see, I said. He swallowed his drink and tried to stand up dramatically, but he winced at the pain in his foot and dropped back into his chair, looking angry and frustrated. I think you might have the wrong idea, I said. You have 2 corpses on the floor of your apartment, and I'm supposed to just take your word for it? Hey now, I said defensively. To be fair, they were with your girlfriend. They just showed up just before she did, and she knew one of them. Honestly, I have nothing to do with them whatsoever. I took a hit off my smoke. You mean other than them being dead in your living room floor? I blew out the smoke. Well, sure, there's that. Devin shifted in his seat and looked like he was trying to come up with words. Look, Devin, I said, let's not get sidetracked with the dead guys. Let's try and stay focused on you, me, and that gun you've displayed such mastery of. He reached into his trousers and pulled out a shiny chrome 6-shooter and set it on the wood crate next to him. I thought you were having an affair, he groaned. He took a deep breath and, for the first time, looked around my place. It was small. My place was. 1 room. Kitchen in one corner with a sink, stove, oven, and fridge. Not much in the way of counter space. I had a little rolling cart with a cutting board that sat next to my sink. My dining room was a pace and a half from the fridge. 2 metal folding chairs and an old wooden milk crate like the kids used to make race cars out of. I had a 27-inch color TV in the middle of the room, sitting on a sofa tray. Across from it, where the couch should have been, was a twin mattress stacked on a 30-year-old box spring in a bed frame. The phone I had leased from AT&T was on the floor next to my bed with a cord stretched out across the room to the jack in the kitchen. So what's the right idea? He asked, starting to sound a little calmer. Well, I said, I'm a kind of helper of sorts, a fixer, a finder or a loser, if that's what's called for. Devin looked back at his chair and refilled his glass. The little encounter was costing me an awful lot of whiskey. These 2 bottles might not get me through the weekend after all. Well, I certainly believe the last one, he said. I frowned, not understanding the joke. Then I got it and shrugged. And Penny? He asked. She said one of those goons was following her. Had been for a couple weeks. Came to see if I could find out why. So you're a private eye? No, sir, I said. Private investigators are licensed by the state and the city and required registration and bonding. No, sir, I simply provide freelance services for folks when they need them. I'll mow your lawn for $3.50 if you like. He looked at me sideways. Sorry, you looked like the kind of gentleman that might have a lawn, I said. I cocked my head and squinted at him. Following her? Which of these guys was following Penny around? Oh, I said, and took a swig of bourbon. That one. I nodded at the body closest to us. The other one's a Fed. What? Devin shouted. A Fed? You killed a fucking federal agent? Again, he tried to jump up. Better this time, but the foot. So he was back in the seat just as quickly. One more drink and he wouldn't feel a thing. Hush, I whispered. Keep your voice down. No, of course I didn't kill him. Devin took a deep breath and seemed to calm down a bit. Okay, well, then who did? Well, I said. Yeah. Okay, I killed him, but in my defense, I didn't know he was a Fed at the time. This didn't seem to sway his feelings on the matter. Jesus Christ, well, why did you kill them? Well, come on. I mean, they did try to kill me first, I said, gesturing at the bullet holes in the walls of my kitchen. I was just standing here, minding my own business, trying to make some goddamn eggs for breakfast. I mean, I made coffee and everything. Real coffee, too, not just Kahlua heated up. So why are they trying to kill you? He asked, clearly trying to find the end of this loop. I don't know. Well, what did Penny say? Nothing. Nothing? Nope. Jesus Christ. I know, I said. Well, you were out all day. What did you find out? He asked. Discount store has shower curtains for $9. His jaw kind of dropped at that, and it made me smile. What the hell, Church? You're an investigator. No, sir. I told you very clearly I'm a helper. But you're supposed to be helping Penny, he whined. No, I'm not. You said she came here to hire you. Right, I agreed. So then you're working for her. No, I'm not. She didn't hire me. He looked baffled. Why not? He asked. Because I already killed the guy, I said, growing exasperated with the conversation. He groaned. Well, then that probably wasn't the best business decision, was it? He was being condescending now, and I wasn't in the mood, seeing as how I still had 2 dead bodies to get rid of that night, and he was still drinking up all my whiskey. Obviously, I didn't know who he was when I killed him, I said. Oh, so good judgment all over the place in here then. I refilled my glass and sat silently drinking and smoking. So you don't even care who he is then? Devin asked finally. I sighed and looked at the body. Not for free, I don't, I lied. He rolled this around for a bit. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a long billfold and opened it. How much for the whiskey? He asked. The whiskey? I repeated. That I drank. How much was it? His words were beginning to slur just a bit, and I could tell the pain in his foot was drifting from his mind. I rolled my eyes up, pretending to do the math in my head. The bottle was $15, I said, exaggerating a little. He coughed and smacked his lips, looking disgusted. He reached in and pulled out some bills. He paid me for the whiskey and the curtains, too. I don't suppose you want to help me get him wrapped up and out of here, I said. He rolled his eyes and stood up slowly and carefully, then straightened his tie. How much to figure it out? He asked. It took me a minute to understand. The guy? I asked. He nodded. $50 a day, I said halfway between a question and a statement. He seemed to be mulling it over, looking around my place, then scoping me out. Plus expenses, obviously, I added. Are you considering bourbon an expense? He said sarcastically. Do I look like I work sober? I wasn't kidding. There was a long pause while he stared at me. Then he opened back up his wallet and pulled out more cash. $250. That's a week's advance. Have something by then or you're fired. You really care that much? I asked. She's my girl, he said, and limped out the door. All right. I am going to let Scott go first, and then also I'm going to let Scott call out the other people to give critique.
Okay, what was that, like 4,000 words? We were placing bets in the chat.
Oh, were you? I don't know. I don't know. I just grabbed something.
First of all, I have problems sometimes, as others have mentioned, when I don't have the text in front of me. I have some problems. I have problems concentrating, particularly when it's one of your stories. But when you hit the line about how many gunshots, I don't know how many gunshots it takes to get the cops to come out here. You had me in that instant for the rest of the story. I actually don't remember what happened before then, because I was my ADHD meds wore off. But I laughed like a half a dozen times at really inappropriate places. Do you just imagine Bruce Willis's voice in your head when you're writing this dialogue?
Oh my God, that's a good question. No, I've never thought of Bruce Willis at all, but we can talk about that sometime.
So I think my favorite line, other than the gunshots, had to have been, "Oh, them."
Yes.
Don't worry, they're dead already.
You know, oh, them. Like, this guy is so nonchalant about the bodies that he has in his room. Your writing is sparse, isn't the right word, lean, in a way that I think noir has to be. Good noir has to be. The dialogue is always snappy. I think there was one bit of description that I would say felt unnecessary, when you were talking about where he got his phone and where his television was, and his ratty mattress and 30-year-old box spring. It stopped the flow dead. And I don't think there was a point. Like, obviously this guy lives in squalor. We got it. Also, you can get a bottle of cheap bourbon now for about 15 or 20 bucks. What era is this taking place in?
80s. Telephone cord.
Are you waiting for me to answer? Because I'll talk at the end.
Question. It's a question.
Yeah, like you can buy a bottle of Jim Beam for $15, but you can buy a bottle of Evan Williams for less.
So, my point stands. Like, is this modern?
It's semi-contemporary. Yeah,
it feels like 50s. The way he was describing leasing a phone and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, and we all agree, I think, that pouring isopropyl alcohol directly into a gunshot wound should have elicited at least one more scream.
Seriously.
And with that, I will turn it over to Ash.
Oh, I got big. Okay. I'm going to start with my critiques first, and then what I liked. So I felt there were a couple of unrealistic things in the piece so far. Like, I really think he would have shot his leg rather than his foot, just because of how men's pants pockets are, like, and how we stand. Much more likely to shoot his leg or even his knee than his foot. And that would have drastically changed the story of the piece. It also didn't feel realistic for the guy to be that chill about two dead bodies in this guy's apartment. Like, you do address like, and there's like tension about there being corpses on the floor, but I felt like that reaction wasn't big enough, or that the fear didn't linger long enough into their conversation. And then what Scott said about like the description of his his apartment, I felt was really accurate. Like it felt like an info dump. I know how you feel about info dumps about character description. Thanks for dinner, babe. Sorry guys, 1 second. And so this was info dumping about setting in a way that could have been done in a way you did do differently throughout the piece, right? Like it started out with the detail about the boot and grabbing the groceries, and then in his living room are the fold-up chairs. Like those things were just kind of parsed out in a good pace, and then full stop, you give an info dump of like what his whole apartment looks like. And a way to break that up could be to do less or to continue to spread it out. Like when he goes into the kitchen space to smoke his cigarette and like refill his drink or whatever, I think that's how you described it. That would have been a great place to just do the kitchen part, right? Separate from a whole apartment description. And I don't know that you needed a whole apartment description anyway, because, you know, as Scott said, like the details you started this story with let us know, like we can fill in the blanks of like, even just from he's sitting this guy in a folding chair and not on a nice couch or like in a nice chair. Like that's enough to let us paint the picture. And then I also felt like their dialogue could have been shorn up a bit. Like they go on and on and on about these dead bodies and who they are and what he's willing to share and what he's not. And that could have been tighter for sure. I don't know that it needs to be, but I noticed that my attention was slipping there. And so I noted that, like, why is my attention slipping here? And that's what came up for me. So that's my feedback on things that could use some work. I really love the details, like the folding chair and putting the boot back on his car. And like, I love those details. Those are like huge setting details done really well in a small but impactful, powerful way. What did I write that for? Oh, just some lines that I wrote down some lines that I really like, oh, don't worry, they're already dead. Like those were really punchy and really done well. But just like echoing what, you know, Scott said. But yeah, I think this piece in particular does a lot of setting work that I haven't seen from you necessarily in the past, and really like set that gritty noir setting atmosphere for us. So I really liked that. I think it was really well done.
Thank you. Scott, you're in charge.
Sorry, I was muted. Let's do Wolf next.
All right, here we go. Firstly, I'd like to say this is a conflict of interest. I cannot critique Neil's work. I read Dark White and I really like Neil's work, but no, I actually wrote down notes. I was just kind of being funny. So I'm going to address lines that I liked because yes, them. Yeah, you know, I really liked those lines as well, but I think also giving credit to other little detailed lines like speaking in staccato burst was really nice. I really liked the way that gave to the cadence. If I'm One of the things that I will say, and this is just my thought, and I understand that you might need to rewrite a lot of things, and it's only something to take into consideration, and it's something that we've talked about before on the lives, is I asked myself, why does this scene exist? And I know that sounds a little bit like negative, but let me hold on to that thought. Because it's set up because a man believes that his girlfriend is with another man, and so there's sets up like this like distrust of their relationship, and not only that, but it's very common in the noir genre, but it also is something like, is it necessary, or is there another way of having this interaction set up in a different way? Be, just food for thought, not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but it is a question that I ask myself. um I just genuinely liked this piece. I thought that it was funny. It was one of those, it's funny but not really funny. uh a couple of things that stuck out to me was the conversation about private detective and private investigator, because I actually had to do the research myself for my own book. And a private detective has the power to make arrests and works for law enforcement. And private investigators work for private entities and companies. Just a little bit of a thing. But then also they're used interchangeably, and they're not really different, but they are different. It's a whole mess. And then I don't agree with everybody that the description of the apartment was an info dump. I think that there's actually a way to keep that info dump and not splice it up. And I think it actually is because the character died, not necessarily that the flow died. So it could easily be fixed up with a line like, "Man, I really did not clean up for guest," and it keeps that humor going. Um, and like then he's like making note of the things that he needs to do in his apartment and stuff like that. I think it more has everything to do with the character like fading rather than it actually being an info dump. And those are my thoughts, and I'm gonna shuffle away now.
Scott.
I'm gonna pick Sophie since Scott.
Scott's all
Okay.
discombobulated, so I was gonna go with Sophie next anyway.
Okay, that totally works. First of all, loved it. Really enjoyed the reading. Um, I have to say that I have a friend who actually shot himself in the foot when he had a gun in his pocket. So that definitely could happen. Um, I would have moved the description of the room and where we are as they're walking in, as he like sits down, um just so that we get a general feeling of where we are. But at the same time, that's a filmmaker talking, so um um as when the bodies were introduced, I immediately started thinking, what about the smell? And I couldn't get it out of my head. So I yeah, I was wondering about that. And then I agree on the dialogue. It was starting to lose me a little bit as they kept going back and forth. So if you could break that up just a little bit so I know what's, yeah, and keep the pace going. But other than that, I really loved it.
And I think that only leaves Kara.
All right. Yeah, I have to say it. He would have lost his shit when alcohol was poured on that wound. Okay. That shit hurts. Um, so that was one of the things I noted. Also in that bit of dialogue that people are saying could be tightened, I agree. And part of what I noticed about it was there's lots of I said, he said, and I know as the reader I'm not supposed to notice that word, but I do notice that word. And I don't know if I noticed it because it just went on for a little too long, or if you can maybe take some of those out since there are only two people speaking and just put in a few body beats instead. Um, I did want to say that I don't know if it's the character or your writing. Like either this character reminds me of Harry Dresden or your writing reminds me of Jim Butcher or both. Um, but that's a good thing. I loved those books. I know it's a slightly different genre, but Harry is a PI.
It's not.
And what?
I'll talk at my turn.
I think he was saying that. I think he was saying that the Dresden File books are still very noir.
Definitely, yeah, but they're fantasy too, right? So that's why I said it was a little bit different. But there's definitely that overlap, and that's what it reminded me of. And I loved those books, and I loved this character. I don't know. I laughed a lot at the dialogue too. I'm also not sure in the time period. Like it did feel very 50s, but then the AT&T phone with the cord didn't actually make me feel 50s. I thought, but again, I was born in 82, so what the hell do I know? But it made me think maybe more 70s or 80s, and I wasn't really sure where we were time wise. Let's see. Other notes. Good judgment, says the guy who shot himself in the foot. Real coffee, not just Kahlua. I think I just wrote down stuff that made me laugh. So that's all I have.
I will also say, as a frequent wearer of men's pants, I have pants that are roomy enough that I could shoot myself in the foot if I were just dumb and an idiot. So Neil, what do you think about all this lovely feedback?
Well, first of all, Harry Dresden, first, and I want to say this as a person who's never read the Dresden Files, but everybody tells me over and over again I need to read them. But I do know enough about them to know that it is very, like, it is a fantasy noir. And noir spans all. You can have sci-fi noir, you can have, fantasy noir. Noir is a is a lot of things. A lot of people talk about noir in terms of a stylistic thing. I look at noir a little bit broader than just stylistic, but definitely I can see how if you've read something that is a noir inspired genre, then this character is going to feel very familiar to you because that's the point. This, of all the books I've written, this is the most like leaning into the stereotypes and the tropes of it. Sophie asked about, like, well, fine, but what about the smell? Wouldn't the smell like be a thing? So this isn't the first scene in the book. This is like 5 scenes in, and one of the first things. So the first scene that happens is when the two guys break in and he kills them. And one of the first things he says is, "I have to get them out of here before they start to attract flies. I'm not that worried about the smell because 2 dead bodies couldn't smell any worse than this place already does.
Okay.
But I have to get them out before they start to attract flies because that'll mess up the stuff they're cooking in the bathtub in the apartment above mine." And so, like, it's so much worse than you even think. Like, it is really like a burnout like place. So that made me laugh when you were like, well, what about the smell? And I was like, oh, don't worry, we've already covered that. But I do appreciate the feedback in terms of like dialogue pacing and certainly dialogue tags. I think sometimes it's harder, especially me, because I don't do voices very well. So it's hard when you're reading it to like see that it's like when you've only got 2 people talking, you don't need a lot of dialogue tags to like bounce back and forth between people. But then if you're reading it out loud and you don't do voices, well, who's saying what? But I really appreciate the feedback about like the description of the apartment breaking things up. I described the apartment, I felt like, slowly across several scenes, but apparently, like, this was a lot all at once. So I will definitely be taking that into consideration when I move forward with, this is very first draft stuff, so I appreciate it all. We will move right down the line. The next person who hasn't read is Wolf.
I am here.
Yes, you are.
Yes,
We
I
appreciate
am. What do you call it? I'll be honest with you guys. I submitted something that I wrote like a little bit long, a little bit a while ago, and it was just what I have a folder called a writing dump folder, and it's just pieces that come to my mind. Um, I'm slightly disappointed that I gave this one, but it's fine. Um, One criticism that I would give Neil is that we should have been doing introductions when we do our piece, just because new people. Um,
You're
I
right.
yeah,
Feel you're right. And in my head, I was like, oh, I should have everybody introduce themselves, and then I didn't do that. So
But we have cool
yeah, we
banners.
have cool banners, but yeah. Let me get my radio voice on. Hello, everybody. I'm Wolf Lovelace. I'm the author of Shadow Game: The Silent Screen. It's out on Kindle. There we go. That's my plug. Okay, we're good. All right. So this piece is called Bog of Maria. Does Wolf know what he wrote? Absolutely not. Was Wolf probably sleep deprived? Absolutely. Okay, there's your context. Uh, you stand at the edge of the bank of the creek, staring out towards the trees. Willows with moss and dangling vines look like hair. Even their trunks look like the figures of women. Maybe that is why it isn't so surprising to see a woman walking into the creek. Her silhouette, shiny, wispy, like that of a ghost, in a white pajama dress, making her look like a little white dot on darkness. All you can see is her figure, and you began to imagine things. She becomes more and more beautiful as her image flickers in and out in the distance like a dancing candlelit flame. Her image is blurred. Sorry, I had a spot on my freaking screen and it messed up the thing. Her images blur like watercolor, wet with water running down the palette, smearing colors. It melts, bends, dances, then nothing, as if she were never there, as if she may have never been real at all. Perhaps she never existed, and you all but hallucinated her image from the window of a diner on the other side of the road. The thing is, after a while, no one knows who she is, but there are stories. Each person who sees her gives her a name. Some call her Maria. Some liars will say they see her walk from the diner to the creek. Those who say they've seen her have not. And you know someone has seen her, usually when they sit in a booth, order a plate of comforting food, and begin to doze in and out of sleep when they've been on the road for long, or they're the type whose mind wanders. They see her manifest, the way a campfire manifests. First, there's the lightning bugs, and you don't quite see her silver silhouette. Then, like lightning bugs, glow like embers, and she grows more and more in detail. You can make out the color of her hair being brown somehow, her pajama dress being pushed and pulled by the wind like ocean waves. Some see her in such vivid detail they abandon their food, crying out for someone to help them. There's a woman out there. There's a woman out there. Confused as to why every patron there is lethargic to help, why no one reacts or says a word. As they run out onto the parking lot and head into the street, all for her visage to fade. And maybe sometimes that image repeats. An unlucky someone transfixed by the image, spilled out into the parking lot, screaming for someone to help her, running out onto the street at the wrong time, only to be struck at night. And maybe sometimes those two images play together at the same time. And that goes on for a while. They sit at a particular booth, see a person run out in the parking lot, scared, frantic asking for help. Sometimes they can hear the brakes. Sometimes they see blinding lights and she vanishes as they do. Sometimes the image disappears before it hits the streets as if attempting to escape their fate. Or perhaps it is a manifestation of the driver's guilt, who comes every Thursday to leave flowers at the side of the road and hopes to appease the spirit who begged for their help. Perhaps it wasn't even their fault, considering no one told them the truth. No one ran out to stop them, to tell them about the ghostly flicker. And those skeptical, those who believe in the mundane as a lash of mental superiority, declare that they have solved the mystery of the woman, claiming it as a security spotlight from some house in the woods that spills out between the canopies. They say shadows are formed by the bending of the light of the fuel pumps, making it look like people are running out in the parking lot. It's the skeptics who cannot stop looking. They're transfixed, attempting to solve her more often than those who believe.
Picture a place beyond sight, beyond sound. A place settled in the imagination. You have entered Wolf's Zone. I swear to God, Wolf, like I am going to give the same disclaimer. Like I can't like review your work because I just love your voice. And so I will say this was great. Very Twilight Zone. So here's my critique. Right at the beginning, you say more beautiful. And I don't know what that means. I think that you need to be specific. More beautiful doesn't mean anything to me because what I think is beautiful is different than what another person thinks is beautiful. I also had a problem with the phrase watercolor wet with water. Well, I mean, duh. But then you had this bit about like the diner on the side of the road. I wasn't typing fast enough to write the whole thing, but that I loved, whatever that was. It was like this thing about this image of the diner on the side of the road. And it reminds me of, there was a series on HBO, I think, about the devil that had a booth at a diner. And people would come and talk to the devil at this diner. And it was fucking weird and awesome. And it just reminded me of that when you did it. There was something about liars. I just wrote liars ? I'm not really sure what I meant there, but it was confusing me. I loved the first mention of lightning bugs. And then like in the next sentence, you mentioned lightning bugs again, and I felt like it diminished it. So I would take out maybe the second mention of the lightning bugs and just hang on to the first one. And then I wrote, there's a woman out there. People in the diner observing, like saying there's a woman out there. I love that. That was like very like chilling in my skin. I loved it. Like this idea that people were like sitting in there and then noticing a woman out there and other people just not paying attention and ignoring that. So that was super cool. I love this piece. I would love to see this like expanded out into a short story kind of thing. It gave such strong Twilight Zone vibes. I loved it. I'm a huge Rod Serling's Twilight Zone fan, so this was great. And I am going to Kara. I feel like always goes last, so Kara is going to go first.
Okay, I'm going to get over my awkward embarrassment. It is Kara, just so you know. My name is
Oh my
Kara.
God, Kara! Kara,
I know. I'm
Kara,
sorry.
I'm
I should have
sorry.
said something.
No, you should. Oh my God!
I know.
Listen to me. I have a daughter named Coraline, and just like in the book, everybody calls her Caroline, always.
Mm,
And I'm like, correct them, because she won't. She just
I
like sits
know.
there and lets them do it.
I'm bad about correcting people as
No,
well. I'm super shy. So
no,
so
always
go me.
correct
I just
people.
did.
Yeah.
It's Kara. So okay, these are my notes, Wolf. You started off with a you, and I was like, 2 times in a row, she's making me do a second person, second POV. What am I trying to say? What's it called? Yeah, second person. Uh, and I was like, what the hell, Wolf? Really? Twice in a row? But I didn't have any complaints after that. Um, I did really like the piece. I really think you're a poet hiding in the guise of a short story writer and novelist. With that said, I do think you could do better than a little white dot on darkness, because I know what you can write like now, and I think you can do better with that description. Star in a black sky, I don't know. Something else. The watercolor, wet with water, I also felt was an awkward and redundant kind of sentence. I really like There's the Woman Out There Too. I think my favorite, I don't know, the line that just like jumped out for me personally and just like rooted inside me was, each person who sees her gives her a name. I loved that. I loved it. Outside of that, your work is very hard to critique because it's so unique. And also, we just like listening to your voice because you're really good at reading it. But yeah, there's a couple little phrases in there, like the watercolor and the little white dot, that I think you could do better with. And otherwise, yeah, turn this into a short story and let us read it.
Ash.
Oh, now, oh, hi.
Wait, real quick, Ash. I haven't been screwing up your name,
Yeah.
have I? It's Ash, right?
And I'm actually Aish. No.
I'm so embarrassed. I can't even, like, it's so hard.
It's pronounced humdinger.
These things happen. I don't have a lot to add that other people didn't say already, which is crazy because I'm only third. But the only other like critique of the language that I had was when you're talking about like early in the piece that her image blurs, and we didn't yet know she was like a specter. And so I was like, is she a specter and she's disappearing, or are we talking about like a woman is walking down into the water? Like that pulled me out of it, because then I was like, why are we just standing here letting a woman drown? That was the only new critique I had to add. I think the piece is really great. I also would like to see this be a short story. I didn't go to Twilight Zone until Neil said it, but yeah, Twilight Zone that's what it's really feeling like. I love the idea that this is like a ghost story. It was giving me, I want to say Twin Peaks vibes, but I don't know why. Like not necessarily Twin Peaks. Yeah, it's just giving me that like eerie, creepy feel of like the Night Vale or
the Night Vale,
other
yeah.
things. So, yeah, I don't have much more to critique. I want to hear more. Like this is a piece I would recommend you toy around with some more and see what it becomes. Not that you don't already have 12 projects already. But yeah.
All right. Sophie.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say, but that was my first taste of ever hearing anything from Ashes. I loved it. It was poetry. It was beautiful. Um I actually disagree with the critique of the wet watercolor. I totally get it. It was, and it made me have these visuals of being in shadow myself on a road and seeing headlights come up and everything else. So it's beautiful. I Short story, yes, I would like to see it filmed. I think it would be a wonderful little story to actually see visually with lighting. And yeah, it was,
Says the filmmaker.
yeah, it was juicy. It was really, really good. And it kind of reminded me of Supernatural a little bit. Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah.
Well, Wolf, I'll let you respond. No, wait. I'm sorry. We have to.
I
not
swear I'm gonna reach through this camera and smack you.
That I did on purpose. I did that totally on purpose.
So those of you that said Twilight Zone, I understand why you said that. You're wrong. I understand why Sophie said Supernatural. She's wrong. It's okay to be wrong. This was creepypasta. This was No Sleep podcast. This was Night Vale was a good call out.
Night Vale was good. I like
Yeah.
No Sleep. No Sleep is a good call out too.
This was a new urban legend started. We just witnessed the creation of a new urban legend. The use of second person point of view is pretty common in this subgenre of horror fiction. The kind of disjointed language is pretty common in this, and this may not have been what Wolf was shooting for, and if not, this is strictly what I am taking from it. I don't understand why people were saying I want this as a short story, because it was a short story. It's just not your typical short story.
I want it longer.
It's not it's not a narrative frame.
No, I was just saying. I was just trying to say I want it longer.
Well, but see, I think the length, as much as I want to hear more of Wolf's voice, I think the length worked, because again, these kinds of, how I'm envisioning it, stories are not long, because they're not intended to be long. If Wolf is shooting for the creepypasta vibe, it needs to be concise and poetic and have kind of a rhythm, an internal rhythm of its own. And I think that's what I took away from it. As far as critiques go, I'm going to stop gushing for a second. Sure, there's some stuff that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. But maybe this was a first draft. I would urge Wolf to keep it in second person, because it fits this story so well, and it's not often you see, hear, read a really well done second person point of view story. I loved all the imagery, although yes, some of it can be tweaked a bit. I'm sure Wolf knows that. But yeah, love it. Want more of it in this vein, not necessarily more of this story, just a much polished version of it.
To be fair, when I did assign the prompt a while back to write a story in second person, Wolf was like, "Oh, well, shit! Like, this is my wheelhouse. Like, I know how to do this. Like, I know what I'm doing." And all the rest of us were like, "Oh, fuck! Really? We're gonna write in second person?" And Wolf was like, "Yeah, second person. Let's go." So, okay, Wolf, go ahead and respond to all the critique.
So, I mean, it's nice to get some good critique on this piece. I'll admit that this wasn't my favorite piece in the entire universe. And I can can handle what do you call it? I admit that I agree with some of the critique, like watercolor wet with water. I actually know what I was trying to convey at the time. If you're an artist, sometimes you can oversaturate your watercolors, and well, yes, it makes sense. You put water on watercolor. If you don't use the medium, you can oversaturate it and make it too wet, and it becomes too runny to use. And so that's what I was trying to convey, but I realized that I didn't convey it like in the way that I wanted to. Some of the use of vague language was kind of what do you call it? Hello, brain. Um, was intentional, like a white dot in the background. Sophie was putting down what I was putting down is that if you've ever seen the openings when you just have like the lens flare of just the white dot as it slowly manifests, that's kind of what I was trying to convey, but I obviously needed to convey it better. I was trying to use as much limited language as I could so that way people could fill in their own image, but I feel like I could strengthen that a lot better on that. What do you call it? And actually, it was funny. Well, I say actually, that's not quite the right word. This was supposed to be the opening. If you guys ever have watched like True Detectives or American Horror Story or like those openings, this was supposed to be like the opening of a very hard thriller that I wanted to do. It was like one of those things where you see like the ghostly flicker and you're like, ooh, what's going on? And then like you move into like chapter 1 and they're like, they found a body in the creek kind of like thing. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with it, but then I abandoned the project because I didn't really like it. So yes, Wolf will reconsider his thoughts on this.
Yeah, and when it comes to like specifically, we've been having some conversations in the comments and stuff about like the watercolor wet with water. Like I understood what you were saying. Like I have 6, 7, 8 kids depending on how you count it. So I do a lot of watercolor. And I've painted a lot of watercolor with them and I've seen them. I understand what you were saying when you were saying that phrase. I just think that the wording was clumsy. I think that there is a better way of saying that than the way you phrased it. But I did understand what you were saying. And
to be fair, in one of Wolf's stories, it's not a given that a person is going to use water.
it's true. It's true. It's true. All right. So we've got, who do we have left? We have Ash and Kara left to read. So I'm going to have Kara go next. And then we'll do Ash.
Okay. This does need a little backstory. I pulled just kind of a random scene out of my current work in progress, but it is book 2 in a series. This book is called Promise of a Bruja. The first book is Token of a Wolf. So what do I need to say about this? This is in Lycos's POV. He is a wolf shifter. It's not like you think of werewolves or anything like that. He's a brujo, and the term, which I'm probably going to butcher because it's actually like an indigenous American word, not a Spanish word, but it's he's called a nahual, and so it's a shifter kind of mythology in La Brujeria. Anyway, so a different kind of shifter than you might think, and I think the only thing with this scene is I know there's not a lot of physical description of the environment, but again, this is book 2, and so this living room has been described a couple of times. So if you need to picture it, it's like light blue walls, gray couches, modern, contemporary. Reading through it after I sent it, I was like, they're going to say it's in a white box, but that's just in this context. And this is happening right after the female main character Rue basically said that her brother is not a fan of Lycos, probably because he's a serial and a liver. And oh, can I say the actual words on
Yes,
YouTube?
it is YouTube. You can say the actual words.
So he's a very morally gray character, and he is a serial murderer, technically. He has good reason, okay? But her brother is a cop and not a fan of Likos. And her brother was finally like, that's it. Like, if you're going to be with him, lose my number. I don't want anything to do with it and whatever y'all are up to. Because they're trying to take down a secret society. That's probably enough.
Yeah.
And I will read. My stomach twisted painfully at Rue's confession. I was at a loss for words. I knew her relationship with her brother was rocky before we ever met, and I knew he didn't approve of me. Couldn't even really blame him. So this development wasn't a huge surprise, yet it was still difficult to face. I finally broke the quiet. Ruhita, I couldn't get the words out. I wanted to tell her I didn't expect her to choose me over Bled. Hell, I should encourage her not to. She would be safer away from me. Probably, as long as she allowed Ryder to look after her and kept working on learning La Brujeria. But the wolf inside of me had already claimed her as our mate, so those words stuck in my throat. She met my gaze. I shut my mouth and shook my head. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It was worthless, in fact, but it was all I could offer. Ben patted her thigh. Did you tell Ryder what happened with Murphy? Maybe he'll be happy with how you resolved it. He probably didn't really mean it, Red. He was angry and worried. Her curls bounced as she shook her head. No, he told me to lose his number. He doesn't want to hear from me. I think, she shuddered, took a deep breath. I think he meant it. Ben shot me a look that clearly told me to say something helpful, asshole. I had nothing. Rue's gaze landed on me again. Her sorrowful eyes sent a wave of guilt coursing through my body, prickly and uncomfortable. Obviously, I made my choice. I'm here. I just wish... She shook her head. It doesn't matter. I'm going to get dressed. I should get back to your mom's. We watched her walk out of the room and heard the door at the end of the hallway click shut. I scrubbed my hands over my face. God damn it. Ben huffed a laugh. Very eloquent. I threw my hands up in exasperation, meeting his eyes. What the fuck am I supposed to say? He shrugged. I understand where Ryder's coming from. If we really care about Rue, we should consider backing off. Let her live a normal life, at least until all of this is over. He'll never accept me. It doesn't matter if we wait until the society is taken care of. Can you blame him? Ben's voice was calm, gentle, but the words still pierced through me, painful as any bullet. Whose fucking side are you on, Benny? I crossed my arms, glaring at him. He sighed. Yours, always. But we both have to think about what's best for Rue. The anger left me as quickly as it surfaced. My shoulders slumped as I let my arms fall, placing my hands flat on the gray fabric of the couch. The problem is, I don't think I can do it. Leave her, be without her. That's a little melodramatic, don't you think? I gave a helpless shrug. It's the wolf. She's our mate. We've claimed her, marked her. Wolf's mate for life. I don't think I can make myself do it. My eyes and my spirit both pleaded with him, hoping he would understand. Oh God, Kos. He pressed his lips together, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. Why didn't you say anything? Does she know? I shook my head. It's never happened before, obviously, and I didn't really know what to expect. It's not as though I have others like me around to find out how it might work. But now when I think about letting her go, I swallowed hard. I don't know if I can handle it mentally. I think it might break me. I was already on the edge, unsure of the source of the voices in my mind. I took a breath, suddenly determined to tell Ben about the voices. The confession was past due. When were you going to tell me? I whipped my head up to find Rue standing in the doorway, hands fisted at her sides. Her eyes blazed with anger and betrayal, and my heart dropped into my stomach. I stood, started to move to her, but she held up a hand, and I jerked to a stop. Why didn't you tell me already? Did I have any say in this? My palms rose in a placating gesture. Baby girl, never mind. I can't do this right now. I have to go. She strode to the door, picking up her purse where she had left it on the armchair. Ben stood as well. I can give you a ride. She jerked her head in a sharp negative. I'm walking. Don't fucking follow me. She hurried out, slamming the door behind her. That is it.
So it's tough with the scene. Like, you gave us a lot of like backstory ahead of it, but the scene doesn't like tell a story, right? Which is okay. Not every scene in a longer piece needs to tell an intact story. So I'm going to deal with what's here. Your dialogue is really good. You've got a sense of dialogue. You've got a sense of how people actually talk. It felt natural. It felt more natural than a lot of, you know, trad published books I read. Like the dialogue felt real. I like the way people correct themselves mid-sentence. So I'm gonna say I really like the way you write dialogue. But if not for the advanced like description you gave us ahead of time, I don't really know who the characters are, and I don't really know what the motivations are. So it's which when you're picking a scene kind of in the middle, it you know, your readers come into it having all the stuff before it. You don't want to rehash things. If there's one thing I hate, it's when a book or a TV show or a movie like comes into a new scene and then has to like remind the reader slash viewer what they saw or read already. Like, don't treat me like I'm an idiot. So I'm not I don't want you to think I'm criticizing you on that, because I'm not. I think that not rehashing it is good. It's just hard for me to give like criticism beyond what I have, because it is a very like self-contained piece within a larger piece, and I don't have the before and after to compare it to. So I will just say I like your dialogue. I think that your dialogue is believable and realistic, and I appreciate that. And Scott's better at this than me, so I'm gonna pull him up next.
So piggybacking off of what Neil said, you've got dialogue like his, which nobody talks like the people in the scene that he read, because nobody's that, you know, quippy, fast, you know, funny, except me and Neil. But that serves its purpose. And then you've got dialogue like yours, which is very real. And one of the things that I love is when characters miss a word, use a wrong word, use bad grammar. I'm not saying you did any of these things necessarily, but doing those things and making it intentional and making it sound intentional and not just like the writer didn't know what they were doing is a challenge. And giving your characters an authentic voice, a realistic sounding voice, while at the same time making it interesting and readable. Because frankly, if you listen to most people's conversation, it's boring and insipid, and you don't want to read that in a book. Is a skill.
Only your conversations are insipid.
Read between the lines. And so I love to see dialogue like that, because it shows that you've done the work. I also picked up on a lot of tension in the scene, which is good. And I want to read what else is going on in this world. I like fantasy that takes, I don't know if you would consider this urban fantasy or where in the fantasy subgenre this would fall, but I like reading fantasy that's not your typical kinds of mythology, which is funny considering what I wrote was basically, your so very typical white bread D&D fantasy, which has its place, but some of the best fantasy that I've read over the last year and a half has been other cultures, other backgrounds, non-traditional characters. So yeah, I want to read your first book and kind of experience that differentness.
All right, thank you. Stacy, I couldn't quite tell where you popped in. Did you hear the story to have response?
I did not.
Okay.
So that's why I'm refraining, because I only caught like the last. I'm sorry, guys. I had to work till 7:30, and then of course had to stay
No.
a little late. But I sadly only saw. Oh, where am I? Alexa, turn on living room space. Anyway.
I'm not quite sure how.
So anyway,
You literally just triggered everybody's Alexa on this call.
sorry, all my lights turned.
It's okay. And I think we lost Stacy. Okay. Wolf, I'm going to have you step in and give a little bit of feedback then.
Okay, I'm Alexa now. I've been activated. I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Wolf's been activated. We're all in trouble.
Yes, we're all in trouble now. So
Shades of the Manchurian Candidate.
right, exactly. So we've had this discussion before because I've been in writers group with Ash and Kara, and I have to get the same disclaimer that I did with Neil. This feels like a conflict of interest. I really like people's work. But what do you call it? The thing that I will always compliment you on is the fact that you have strong dialogue that actually feels like real people. Scott was talking about how most of the time, like, real people talk in in a way that's not very clean and not very precise. And yet there's something about the way that you write dialogue that somehow, even though it's clean and edited, doesn't feel precise and doesn't feel clean. You've managed to capture the illusion of natural dialogue that I think that a lot of people don't always know how to capture, and I've always appreciated your dialogue. I don't really have a lot of critiques for the piece because it was so dialogue heavy and because it was like, we're in the middle of a scene. I like it. I want this book. I want the other book too. Just give it to Wolf. I don't know what that even means. Wolf wants to eat it. I have a thing about wanting to bite things. It's a stimmy thing. And that's it.
All right, Ash, you're up.
What are my thoughts? I've done a lot of writers groups with Kara, so I am like starting to like over time articulate better what I'm trying to get her to try more of, and I keep coming back to I want from her more showing, not telling. And then we had a discussion recently about like in first person, that's so hard. It's literally the character telling how they feel. But I realized listening to this piece that actually what I'm wanting out of the piece is more is just more of the character's emotions. Kara, you're really nope, I'm not available. Sorry, there's a child. I'm not available. 1 second.
Come on.
I have to say that I feel Ash right now in a way that, for those of you that don't know, I have 6 children that are biologically mine.
That
Okay.
you know of.
I'm so sorry. Everyone can relate
Yep.
though, right? Yeah.
Very much.
Now I lost my train of thought a little bit. What I'm wanting more of is and is hard in first person is where I was going with that, is the feelings and emotions of the characters. Like in this piece, I heard a lot of like very short, concise descriptions of how they're feeling. But, you know, in this scene, and I want to see the text in front of me, it's a little harder. But even when I think about the last scene from this series that I looked at, those descriptions of emotions are very concise, very quick, and sometimes that makes sense in the scene because things are happening fast paced, like storming out and leaving the guys behind. But examples like a wave of anxiety coursed through me could have been slower, could have been longer, in a way to like really put me in the shoes of the character more. And I think that is a better maybe description of what I'm trying to get at with Kara's. Like, it's not necessarily show don't tell. It's maybe more of this like slow it down. Like I frequently get critiqued that I have a lot of purple prose, and I almost want to see Kara lean closer to purple prose, like just like a little bit more description, a little bit more putting the reader like in the space with them, I think is the best. Sure. I'm gonna steal that. Anyway, that's my feedback.
All right. Let's see. Who do we got? We got Sophie, you're up, it looks like.
Okay. First of all, I wanted more. I just got a little taste, and I wanted more. The second that I heard when the stomach twisted, I was hooked. I love the tenseness, and my only question is, were the voices in her head, or where were the voices coming from? Because I got a little lost on that, and it kind of broke this mesmerizing feeling I was having with your writing. But other than that, it's fantastic. I kind of want to know more.
All right. Kara, unless I missed someone, because that does happen, Scott.
You missed me again, brother.
You already talked. Okay.
Scott
Kara,
did already
it's fine.
talk. Yeah, thanks for all the feedback. I do underwrite, and this is a very rough draft, so I don't actually usually do alpha readers because I know I underwrite, and I do a lot of revising and add a lot of words before I give it to beta readers. But I have found we've done a couple work in progresses in the other group, and I have found that to be helpful insofar as like I know what I think I should add. I know there needs to be lots added, and I know what I think that should be, but it's interesting to hear from other people what they think that should be. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm sure it's hard out of context. I think I was leaning heavily on the fact that Ash and Wolf already know this story a little bit. So there's that. But yeah, dialogue is my thing. I love dialogue. And what else was I going to say? Oh, the voices in his head. So yeah, that would also be another thing that would be much clearer if you had read the previous stuff. But he is he's going a little bit nuts. He's descended from the Greek goddess of Themis on his dad's side. He's half Greek, and there's this thirst for justice that kind of it's almost more of an obsession, right? That kind of drives him. And insanity does run in his father's family, because when you can't stand to see injustice and you live in the world we live in, that sucks. So that's kind of where the voices stem from. But let's see. I don't think I had anything else. Just I appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.
All right. All right. Let me see how this works. Okay. So we're gonna do Ash next, and then Stacy will do you after Ash. And so if everyone can just hang out for just a little bit, we're gonna have Ash and then Stacy. And then I wanna take some time to because as it was pointed out, I screwed up and didn't have everyone introduce themselves at the beginning. We'll do a quick introduction at the end, and we'll get to talk about what we're working on. So everybody hang out for just a minute. We're going to have Ash read her piece, and then we're going to go from there.
Okay. So my piece is a scene from a work in progress called Dark Artifacts. It is a magic fantasy kind of inspired by 1940s London, very loosely, if that's helpful. And the specific scene is titled Oubliette. The heavy oak door of the pub groaned on its hinges as Bee pushed it open, letting a gust of icy wind spill inside. Clayton was close behind Bee and Clayton was close behind and Bee glanced back at him, her cheeks flushed from both drink and the company. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding that warmth as long as possible. Here, Clayton said, slipping his coat from his broad shoulders. The black wool was worn, but well kept, with a faint scent of cedarwood. You'll freeze before we make it halfway. Bee hesitated, but the chill nipping at her skin was unforgiving. Thank you, she murmured, sliding her arms into the two large sleeves, the fabric enveloping her, heavy and comforting. Clayton smiled softly, and she found herself mirroring it. He was so smitten with her, and he had been for weeks, this she knew, but she was forming a fondness for him too. It was new. She'd been with several men since Lark, but they were superficial relationships, physical. It felt how falling in love with Lark had felt. The cobblestone street stretched ahead of them, gas lamps burning feebly as they walked in companionable silence. In the distance, the faint toll of a church bell echoed in the crisp air. It was late. Bee shivered despite the warmth of Clayton's coat. Her fingers tightened around the lapels. You're quiet, Clayton said, his gaze flitting to hers. I despise cold weather, Bee said, her breath curling in silvery wisps. Clayton stepped closer, his hand brushing hers briefly before retreating. Bee wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or his touch that forced a wave of warmth from her stomach to her cheeks. Either way, she smiled and took his hand, and they continued walking with their fingers entwined. She considered whether or not she would invite him inside her apartment once they arrived. Bee slipped her free hand into the deep pockets of Clayton's coat, seeking refuge there, and wishing women's coats were equipped like this. Her fingers brushed against something smooth as glass at the bottom. She pulled it closer, snooping, intending to pull it out and see what it was. But as her fingers clasped wholly around it, the world twisted violently around her. A thunderous crack shattered the silence, and she felt herself yanked, pulled through space, as though she were unspooling. The air turned thick. Colors bled together, deep crimson, searing gold, and endless black. Her stomach twisted as if falling or flying. Then, with a sickening lurch, she was plunged into icy water. Plunged was not the right word. Enveloped? She hadn't any warning to prepare for breath. The shock of it seized her lungs, and for a moment she couldn't think. There was only the freezing cold, the crushing pressure, the suffocating darkness. She twisted, tumbling end over end in the weight of her soaked clothes. Panic racked her as she clawed against the water, her arms flailing for any sense of direction. Her lungs burned. Air bubbles wafted their way to the side, and she suddenly realized the side must actually be up, a way out. Kicking furiously, she pushed herself that direction. Her limbs felt laden, every movement a struggle. Clayton's wool coat, comforting just moments ago, became an anchor preventing her progress, and she shrugged out of it and continued kicking. She fought against her body as it forced a breath, searching for air, only to inhale water. And just as her vision began to blur, her head broke the water's surface. She gasped, then vomited, then gasped a ragged, coughing breath again. "Clayton!" she screamed into the dark. She spun around looking for him, but he wasn't there. She was alone. In the distance was a dark shoreline with a strange ink-black sand. The waves lapped at it sluggishly, as though reluctant to reach land. Shivering uncontrollably, Bee forced her aching body to swim. Each stroke through the surf was a battle, and when her feet finally found sand beneath them, she paused to rest for a moment. Finally, she stumbled onto the beach, her legs trembling beneath the weight of her sodden clothes, and she collapsed to her knees. Sand clung to her, gritty and thick like small shards of black glass. She sank down, trembling and gasping and coughing. She hugged herself against the chill and looked out at the endlessness of the black beach. The silence was absolute, the kind that made her feel as though she'd been dropped into another world entirely. She would freeze to death if she didn't find shelter soon, and for as far as the eye could see, there was none. That's it.
All right. So let me pull up my notes that I took. First of all, Ash, surprisingly, as long as we've known each other, and as well as we've known each other, we've done surprisingly few writers groups together. So your work is always still like new to me. It's good. Like Scott and Wolf, you know, we have a shorthand and we joke around because we've heard each other's work so much that we know what to expect. But I'm always still surprised with you. So how falling in love with Lark had felt. Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. I think that that's too specific. I think either you need to say, like, this is what falling in love feels like, because clearly, like, unless I'm missing something that's like not, you know, that's outside the context of this scene, like they're comparing it to the one other time they've fallen in love. So as far as they're concerned, this is how falling in love feels. And so making it so specific as to how falling in love with Lark had felt makes it diminishes it, because it's like, oh, this is like this one other thing, as opposed to like, this is how it feels to fall in love. You used the word crisp air, and I wrote too much. I think it was just too many, like too many descriptions on top of descriptions, and I think crisp air is just too generic a description, and either do away with it entirely or find a more interesting way of saying it. You said, I despise cold weather. I loved that. It was very specific. It was very specific to that character. And then in that same thing, you're talking about them walking and holding hands in the cold air. And it brought me back to like the early chapters of Dark White when Gavin Gale and Weather are walking through the quad of the University of Chicago, and it's cold out, and he gives her his jacket, and they're holding hands, and it just reminded me of that, so I liked it because it reminded me of my writing, so I liked it. Cold walk, thunderous crack. Come on, Ash, you can do better than that. That is, everyone's written that phrase. Like, you can do better than thunderous crack. Falling or flying. That was good. You said you couldn't tell if it felt like it was falling or flying. I mean, they're the same thing, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. That's Einstein's whole theory of relativity right there. There's no difference between falling and flying, and I loved it. It made me very happy. Your description when they're under the water, I said drowning description. I don't think they were specifically drowning, but that whole like description of being underwater and trying and being afraid of drowning, like they're sinking or what's up, what's down. That was really good. And I especially liked when you got to the wool coat that was comforting originally, but was now soaked with water and became an anchor and was pulling them down and was dangerous. That is such a good contrast. Like, it's a really good thing for the reader to like feel those dichotomies. I wrote trembling. I don't know why. The black glass I liked, especially when they're up on the shore and it's like the black glass is endless. Like, that was great. And then I wrote absolute, and I didn't write any context, and I don't remember what that was about. But I love your descriptions in general. I think that there are moments when you lean back on cliche, and we all do it, especially like in first and second drafts. We just like grab onto the things that are familiar. And I was on a call when I was doing my final edit of Malcolm Karma, and I was on a call with Stephen Axelrod, and he was going through stuff from the book, and he was like, he would find things and he'd be like, Neil, I have read this book. I have read your writing. I know what you're capable of, and it's bullshit that you use this description. Like, you're better than this, and you need to do better. And there were moments in this where I was like, Ash, you're better than this. Like, just do better. And but the story is great, and I love where you're going. And yeah, so we're gonna go to where are we gonna go to next? We're going to go to Stacy. You're up.
Hello. Ash, is it that wrote this?
Yes. Yep.
I think there were some really nice moments in it. I think my favorite was when she reached into his pocket and then she was in a no. So I do fairy tales, right? And I always love how authors like get their characters from one world to another, even if it's a meta, you know what I mean? Like, that was the hot moments for me. Like, I really love that space twirling, just the language and how it happened and how she got there was spot on. I liked it.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. And now we are going to go to Sophia.
Sorry, I was eating. I really enjoyed it. You've had me at the first sentence. there is some cliche. I would agree with that. Other people had said. Um, I was being handed my dinner between the wool coat and the water, so I lost where that whole happened. Like how did they ended up drowning suddenly? But I loved it. It was really good. I'll just
All
keep
right.
it short today.
Scott.
I'm finally on my comfort solid ground situation because Neil was wrong so many times. So many times. First of all, I won't be referring to my own work twice in the course of this critique. Relativity has nothing to do with falling or flying.
Yeah, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Okay,
Relativity
we'll
is
talk later.
energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
That's one part of relativity. He also talks about the whole elevator.
Are you a physicist?
Yeah,
No.
as a matter of fact.
No, you're not. You're a writer. You're not a physicist. Okay, I could be wrong about the relativity thing. I'll
You
cop
are.
to that.
It's okay. We'll talk about it later.
How falling in love with Lark had felt was a great line, because falling in love with someone is different with every person you fall in love with. It personalizes it. Just saying it's how falling in love felt. I mean, that's, you guys talked about cliches. That's cliche. But how falling in love with Lark had felt made it personal. And I think it was a very good line. Crisp air, lovely. Because saying cold air doesn't really say anything besides temperature. Crisp is like, the word crisp is like, you know, a cold apple is crisp. You know, when you say, yeah, mountain morning, when you say the air was crisp, like it brings to mind, you know, fall days with crunchy leaves, and there's just so many things that are evocative in that word crisp. I think it's a great adjective. I did have a question, although this is kind of only applicable if you're listening to it as an audiobook. Is it too large TWO or too large TOO? The sleeves that she pulled on. There's something
actually know.
there is something so intimate about wearing your lover's coat.
Yes.
I loved that detail. And I especially love how it came back to bite her in the butt later on in the story. Never snoop. Never go looking in the pockets because you're going to find something. I loved the description of her transitioning as unspooling and all of the colors. She wouldn't question which word. She wouldn't be like drowning and be like, am I enveloped? Or what would be the word that I would use here in the situation where I'm drowning? So now I know you as the writer were like, which word should I use here? But she wouldn't be doing that.
Come on, as writers, we would all be doing that. We'd be sinking in the water, and we'd be like, "Am I? What?
That's true.
What exactly is
That's
going
true.
on here?"
Was the dagger that stabbed me envenomed, or was it poisoned? I love all of the sensory detail. I do have a question. Is it established somewhere in the book that she is either a good swimmer, or B, very athletic? Because as someone who grew up on the coast and who swam a fair amount, swimming fully clothed and with that coat on her back, she gonna drown if she's not. Did she get rid of the coat? I don't think she did.
Yeah, she got rid of the coat.
Oh, she did? Okay,
Yeah.
well that sucks.
It does.
But it's good that it lightened her load a little bit. Also, Neil, it was black sand, not black glass. I understand that relatively, see what I did there? They are close to being the same thing. But
Didn't you say black glass at some point?
Yes.
Yes.
but the beach is black sand, though.
The sand is like shards of black.
Let me have this one. Let
Okay.
me have
No, he doesn't get to have any on. He gets to be wrong. Scott, just sit there being wrong in your wrongness and be wrong.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm right about crisp. So
Okay, Scott's done. We're gonna go. Kara, you get to blast Ash now.
You know, I'm actually going to pass on this one because we did this piece on Monday.
She blasted me on Monday.
So for the sake of, timeliness and everything,
Okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
I already workshopped it with her a couple days ago, and she already knows all the things, all my thoughts. So
Okay,
Kara, just tell me I'm right about crisp, okay? Just tell me I'm
it's
right.
Kara, come on.
I know it is Kara. You said it right like the first time earlier, Scott. So you're all getting all confused. I'm not taking sides. I am not taking sides on that. I don't think I had an opinion about crisp in my original feedback to her on Monday, so I'm gonna leave it.
Okay, Wolf. No, Scott, you've had your time. Wolf
Wolf will also pass on this, as this was.
You were there too. Got it.
Yeah, I was there too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that is. Did I miss anybody or?
Okay, so Wolf, crisp, yes or no?
No. Wolf is not commenting on that. We're taking Wolf off the big screen and putting Ash back here, and Ash gets to talk about her piece.
Yeah, I really like the feedback about cutting the line, about her being enveloped in water. As I was reading it out loud, I was like, that needs to go. But what I was trying to portray is that she didn't like fall into a body of water, but suddenly was like blinked there, like transported there, like she appeared in a new world surrounded by water. So there's obviously a different way to do that. I also will take the feedback about her swimming. It's not established her quality ability of swimming, but she has a lot of barriers working against her, right? It's freezing cold, she's wearing clothing, all of that. And then the feedback about falling in love with Lark, it is me saying that she's falling in love, period, right? Like that she has had all these other relationships. They haven't had feelings. They've just been physical relationships to fulfill her needs, but this is falling in love. This feels like what falling in love with Lark had felt like. And Lark is this character in the story. So that is her saying she's falling in love with him. So I'll take my mixed reviews about how that felt. But I just wanted to explain, like, that's why that line is there, is because
Look, I agree with Scott in terms of, okay, everybody hold your breath. Ready? I agree with Scott in terms of like falling in love with different people feels different, but being 47 years old and having been in enough relationships where I would legitimately say I had fallen in love, I will say that like there is a feeling of falling in love that is general there beyond the specifics of like it felt like falling in love with this person or this person. Like there's a feeling of falling in love, of that like experience of like finding yourself in like emotionally enveloped, like the elevators at the Shining Hotel are opening and the waters of love or blood are like pouring out and you're just like enveloped in them. Like you don't
Why
have a
are we
lot of
suddenly in The Shining?
Yeah, we're in The Shining now.
well, that's what love is.
What
It's-
how I'll respond to that.
it's
Blood.
love is like being at the Shining Hotel.
Love is a Stanley Kubrick
yeah.
movie based on a
So-
Stephen King book.
So I'm saying is that like while there are specifics to individual people, the feeling of falling in love in general is a specific feeling that can be generalized across the experience. And I think that when you call it out relating to one specific person, it diminishes that as opposed to like elevating it.
That's a lot of words for saying I'm wrong. Also, we don't have enough time to go into it, but who hurt you?
a lot of people.
So how I will respond to that is that this character is not a 47-year-old man. This character is a young woman, and she has only fallen in love once, and is traumatized and really damaged and broken and hasn't even had the desire to fall in love with anyone else. And that it's not about comparing it to Lark or that experience. It is recognizing that feeling is there at all.
Okay.
And not even having really the language for it. And so she has to say it that way. So
as a person who has been damaged and such, like we can have that conversation in another place and time. But it was a beautiful piece and obviously engendered a lot of feelings from everybody that was involved in it. And for the sake of time, I am going to say thank you, Ash, and we're going to move on to Stacy so that Stacy can read her piece and get some feedback.
So this piece is, I don't know how this really goes, so I'm just going to give the spiel. The piece that I'm writing, it's like the second chapter of a book that I'm working on, Briar's Hollow. And before this is kind of important to know because it leads up. Before this, there was a fairy tale. I write fairy tales. There was a fairy tale about a woman in the woods who raises her child, but the child can never leave the inside of the grove that they live in. The child gets curious, grows up, goes into the grove, gets captured by a troll, and her heart is cut open and bleeds, and the fairies come and wrap her heart in stone because the mother is begging the fairies for help, and everybody lives, and the girl was never the same. Right.
So a combination of Sleeping Beauty and Speed.
Yes, exactly. Oh my God.
Okay.
So
I think you just blew her mind a little bit.
So anyway, so what I'd really like when I'm reading this to think of what parts of the plot have, because I really like the language, but I think it's too much. It's like 4,200 words, and I'd like to cut this by 500. But maybe everything in the chapter is necessary. So if you feel like it's absolutely necessary, let me know. But otherwise, let me know. I'm too close to it. I can't tell what parts you would let go. All right, here goes. Hey, honey, time to wake up. Her mother's quiet knocks cracked through the air, through the forest. Her mother's voice exploded, created unbreakable waves that toppled whatever lay in its path. Everything was laid to waste. The fabric of the universe wobbled and warped, hot air rising from the force of the collision. The forest grew distant and hazy, stretched thin until it became flat, two-dimensional. She felt like a dot that kept getting smaller and smaller until she no longer existed. Keith's eyes opened. She was shivering, awake, in her room. She felt like something that had been forcibly squeezed into and then poured into something in which she didn't fit. And she could still smell the forest on her skin. And it made her wonder about her dreams. In science class, her teacher mentioned how real may not mean what we think it means. Several quantum physicists won the Nobel Prize for proving the universe was not locally real. These words earthed themselves inside of her, grew roots deep inside, and were not part of who she was. Her head hurt, though, when she thought about it too much, like how your eyes feel after you've kept them open for too long, like in a staring contest. Apparently, particles, the infinitesimally small things that make up atoms, can instantaneously affect other particles that are hundreds of thousands of light years away, and that somehow these particles were connected and tangled across millions of light years instantaneously. Previously, this would have been considered scientific heresy. The first commandment of modern science is that nothing, absolutely nothing, can travel faster than the speed of light. But these scientists gathered enough evidence even to overwhelm even Einstein's faithful followers. However, it was not the real part to her that was most disturbing. Ever since learning about this, she started having many panic attacks several times a day. It was disturbing to live in a universe where particles, the things inside atoms, can somehow tell 100% of the time if they are or are not being observed. And if they are being observed, they become something real, made of particles, solid matter. If they're not being observed, they become something not real, made of waves dissipated into non-reality, until they are again observed, which makes them instantly transform into solid matter again. Even thinking about the logic of it hurt her head. I don't know how that got changed. Finding out the universe blipped in and out of existence, depending on whether she or was not observing it, filled her with a foreboding doom. And were the things in her dreams real while she was dreaming? Or was it just blips and blops of her mind trying to grasp living the day? If small bites of quanta can only be real or observed, the larger things they make up, such as mountains, trees, lakes, rivers, disappear as well. She imagined herself making entire galaxies disappear by just not observing them. It was disturbing to her that a universe would just construct itself to give her that kind of power. She wondered if things like the moon or her mother disappeared in the quantum void when she was not observing them. Kifa, time to get up. It was her mother's voice through the door again. This time it was louder, more frustrated. She did not want to get up yet, pretended to keep sleeping. She didn't dare move a muscle, as she could feel her mother listening for even her slightest movement. Lots of the packing of the car still needs to be done, her mother continued. She could tell her mother knew she was awake, lying there in silent defense. Sorry, Charlie, you need to get up now. There was no more sugary tone in her mother's voice. Her mother's knocks on the door started to sound less and less like cracks of thunder. The forest that had surrounded her in her dream dissipated, and her skin now just smelled sweaty. No more forest. The blankets felt heavy on top of her, and she could no longer feel the forgotten forest breeze on her skin. Kifa groaned silently. She pulled the covers over her head, hoping it would make the world go away. Today was the annual Morrison family trek up to the Boundary Waters. Every year, she and her family made up with her families at the resort Boundary Waters in the North Woods, Minnesota, for a week. Well, it was the highlight of the summer, and she loved running around the woods, swimming with her friends, but getting there was horrendous and miserable. She wished a quantum miracle could make her and her mother blip in an instant from their house to St. Paul to Campfire Bay with all their stuff, without the packing and the drive. If the universe was not local and not real, she didn't understand why this was not an impossibility. The resort they went to, called Campfire Bay, otherwise known as CBR, was the small family-owned cabin resort they went to every year in the fall. Too much, yeah. It sat next to Lake Sagatagan, and the camp with which they sat on a large hill and was appropriately named Eagle's Nest. From this vantage point, you could see nothing but lakes and the massive forest. It was along the infamous Gunflint Trail, 45 minutes past Groin Marais, 50 miles past the Canadian border, and a little over 6 hours from St. Paul, where she and her family lived. You could easily tell where the designated part of the Boundary Waters started by looking across the lake shore. It is where things made by humans stopped. Kifa, honey, really, time to get up now. More knocks on her bedroom door. There's still a lot to do before we can get out of here. Instead of answering, she buried her head in the pillow. The pressure of it helped block out the future day's events. Kifa, her mother whispered just a bit louder and more insistently. She reminded herself that once everyone got up there, it was the best. She couldn't wait to see Dara and all the others that came. Couldn't wait to explore. The more they got to run around the forest and do pretty much as they pleased for a whole week. She heard her mother open the door and walk in. Can I get a couple of more minutes, please? Please. Silence, she continued. I promise. Afterwards, I will get up and work really fast, please. Her mother hesitated. Keefe used her most successful pleading look. Alexi's shoulders softened. Okay, there was a pause. You can sleep for 10 minutes more, but no more. Only 10, she quickly added. I do really need your help getting things into the car. All members of the Morrison family are required to help. Another slight pause, and then she said, once we're all packed up on the road, you can get more sleep. Okay, Mom, thank you. I'll be up in 10 minutes, promise. There were exactly two members of the Morrison family, Kifa, who had just turned 13, and Kifa's mother, Alexa, who hadn't seen 13 in 4 decades. Kifa had never met her biological father. Her mother used all members in order to impress upon her 2 important points. 1, that even if it was just the 2 of them, they were still a family. And 2, that when used, the request was actually a requirement, non-negotiable. Whining would not be tolerated. She laid there under the covers, warm and cozy, and fell back asleep until she heard her mother knock on the door. Can I get you anything for breakfast? You hungry, honey? Which in translation through the passive-aggressive mother meter really meant 10 minutes is done, get up now or else. Kifa wondered how a person could be so cheery, so loud, so early in the morning. No, I'm fine. I'm getting up. I'll make myself a bagel or something. Sounds good, her mother. Make it quick. We've got lots to do. Added and remembered, once we're on the road, we can get more sleep. No worries, Mom. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I feel like this is way too much exposition. What do you all think?
All right. Well,
I
Stacey,
mean, just
you and I, like, we've had this conversation before, so I am going to just talk about like the overall of it all, right? And I
yeah,
think you've got a fun story with fun characters, and you and I have had the conversation about the actual physics of all of this, and
yeah, but it's my
uh,
world, so I don't care.
right. So that's what I've said. And I think I've said that to you. Is like, it doesn't matter what's
Yeah,
what's actual versus not. Like, this is a fictional world and a fictional story, and you take it and you tell the story, and it's fun to use like the ideas, like, and and all of that to make it work. So I would just say, like all of the criticism I have of your story is about, like, well, like, that's not what locally real means, and that's not like, but none of that matters, right?
right.
Because you're telling a story and you're telling a fairy tale, and it's fun and it doesn't matter. And so that being said, I just think this is fun. I think it's great. I think it's so, like, fun to play with these ideas and take the science that's coming out, and play with like the ideas of what that means, and like ground a fairy tale in something that is, you know, somewhat scientific, and say, what does this mean for like fairy tales, and how could this like explain the way that the world works? And so I actually have nothing like really negative to say. um I enjoyed this, and I enjoy what you're doing with this, and I think you and I have actually talked about this particular story before. So like people have done in previous versions, like, I'm not gonna like go too deep into it, because you and I have had this conversation about
Yeah.
this story, and I really like it. So Scott is the one that like wants to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to physics. So I'm going to let him come in and be wrong for a little bit.
No, I will bow to your apparently superior knowledge, because I did not know you were a physicist. Learn something new about your friends every day. I just assumed that you were such a good writer that you made your living writing. No, I knew that wasn't true, but that's not because you're not a good writer. It's just because you're undiscovered. The thing that I love about this is even if the narrative is completely wrong, it gets back to what I was saying earlier about dialogue. It is not important, or it should not be important, for a character in a story to be right about things they don't understand. Like,
Right.
I have a young adult science fiction series, and the main character is a teenager, and here I am referring to one of my own stories. Sorry, but it's to make a point, not to self-aggrandize. And that is, she doesn't understand how the faster than light drive works, and so therefore I don't have to explain it to my audience. I get the hand wave. So even if your 13-year-old character, I think I heard she was 13,
Yeah.
Doesn't get anything right, it's because you can just say, well, she's 13 and she heard these things, and this is her understanding of the reality of the situation. You don't even have to say, this is my fictional world, it's how things work, although you can certainly say that as well. I just I think it's unfair for a person to critique a story and say, oh, the science is wrong, if the character given the explanation of the science is a 13-year-old who doesn't know anything about the science. Now, if a person is critiquing the science in Jurassic Park and the scientists in the story are getting it wrong, then it's a fair critique. If you had a physicist in your story and they were getting the physics wrong, then it would be a fair critique, but you could still come back and say, well, this is how physics work in my world. I think it's a really interesting story. I love that this character who sounded very mature in a lot of ways ends up just being this kid who really doesn't want to get out of bed, who's going to the lake to visit friends. It makes me want to know what makes her tick. Why does she care about physics? What's her deal? And then obviously I want to know the fairy tale aspect of it. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you need a beta reader, hi.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's too much exposition. I really don't. Sure, there are places you could trim, but I would not cut much, because it gives us a look into this young lady's head, into her world, and one thing that I like to do with my fantasy stories is I like to ground them in some fashion in reality, so that when we get to the fantasy part,
Yep.
it's that much more fantastic.
Yep.
So that's my 2 cents.
All right. And before I move on to the next person, just to let Scott off the hook just a little bit. When I said when we were arguing and he was like, "Are you a physicist?" and I was like, "Yeah." Like, no, like, I don't make a living as a physicist. I was on the path down into physics. I was very interested in physics. I studied physics, and I spent 10 years working at Fermi National Particle Accelerator Laboratory. So I worked with real physicists.
That makes you much more of a physicist than I am, brother.
But I am not. I do not want you to think that my job is to do physics. Like, it's not. Sophie, you're up, and what do you have to say?
Yeah, so my I think you actually critiqued yourself as you were reading it, and you're like, "Oh, I don't like that wording," when you said, when you were telling about the cabin that they go to, after you had talked about the cabin that they go to. But I liked it because okay, I don't like fairy tales too much. I'm not into fairy tales, but I like the modern twist and the sciencey twist to it. And you kind of hooked me with that, and you pulled me in, and I wanted more. So, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I will say, Stacy, that I was muted, and so I was talking and you didn't hear me. But I started out reading to my 10-year-old daughter, and now I am currently reading to my 10-year-old daughter, my 8-year-old son, and my 5-year-old daughter, Stephen King's book, Fairy Tale. And they're obsessed. And so if you are when your book comes out, like they're obsessed with like these modern kind of like, yeah, she's just like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. So next we will go to Kara and let her give her opinion.
Okay, so I'm going against the grain here. For me, it was a little too much exposition. And when you said fairy tale, I got super excited. And when you started with all the science stuff, my mind kind of wanted to turn off. Now, take that with a grain of salt because I am permanently exhausted right now, and a little bit brain dead, honestly. I'm doing my best, but I have a lot going on, and winter is really hard for me because I have chronic illness. Anyway, so for me, it's not that I don't like or understand science, but it's not what I was expecting. And uh, I'm like getting close to bedtime here, and I was like, oh no, I can't, I can't, I can't even figure out what she's saying. So for a fairy tale reader, I didn't love that personally. I do love fairy tales, folk tales, mythology. I have a whole shelf of that stuff from all over the world. I incorporate into my stories a lot as well. And that was not my favorite thing. However, that being said, this is your character. But I would say for me, it would have been better to have just a little bit less of it, or, you know, spread it out a little bit more, maybe. I don't know. Again, I'm in the minority here, so feel free to ignore me, but that's where my brain was when I was listening to it. I want the fairy tale part, and I wasn't seeing where that was going to come in, and so I guess I was feeling a little impatient about it. But yeah.
And while Kara's like point of view is certainly legitimate, when she talks about being tired, I would like to point out that Kara is basically doing like 10 hours of TikTok live every day, trying to promote her new book that's coming out. And
Yeah,
so
that.
I'm sure her brain is a little fried. Just I work during the day and I hop on TikTok sporadically throughout the day. And as I'm scrolling, it's constantly coming up with Kara like sitting there at her desk, holding up her book and answering questions. And like, but yeah, hold on, don't put it away. Don't put it away. I'm gonna put you big. There you go. Hold on, hold it up there.
Congratulations.
So, token of a wolf. There we go. Please, like, promote the hell out of yourself when you can. So yes, Kara has been doing that like a machine, and I give her credit. Actually, Ash, who had to drop off, but Ash texted me the other day and was like, "Hey, I just saw someone promoting their book on a live, and they were just sitting there with their book held up, like answering questions, and they were selling books, and maybe that's something you should consider doing." And I was like, "Yeah, was it Kara?" And she's like, "No, but yeah, she's doing that too." And I was like, "Yeah, because I see Kara all day." and I appreciate what you're doing. I'm going to
The Kickstarter is only a couple of weeks long, so it is a finite amount of time that I'm doing this. I'm not usually this obnoxious, but yeah, I am doing it right now, and it is killing my brain. As a shy, introverted person, being on live as much as I have is definitely a little mind numbing. So
Okay,
thanks for understanding that.
Let's get Wolf to converse, and then we'll let Stacy talk, and then we'll all do our little pitches, and then we'll wrap up for the evening.
So, I've been giving this disclaimer a lot tonight. This was not my thing, and I'll admit that. So, any of my critique that's going to come out is going to probably come out as this is not my thing, and it's not about the science fiction aspect of it. I like the sciencey element. I don't know if I agree with the idea that a fairy tale is written. I woke up and then we went to here and then we did this and then we did that. It's. I would like scenes to marinate. I think I don't necessarily believe that you need to cut. What I believe is that you need to make scene breaks and then expand out on those scenes on what's going on, because like I feel like I'm just going from the next scene to the next, and I've read folklore and mythology, and I've never read anything that like reads like that, and it was taking me out of it, and I will admit that I have ADHD myself, and it was really hard for me to focus on it and like actually like grip onto the story. I could feel my mind wandering, and that's not necessarily the best feedback for you. I can admit that because this is all personal preference, but I also feel like sometimes we need to like express personal preferences as like ways of people understanding other people's internal thinking. And so yeah, I mean, I'll admit that I was completely like I tried my hardest to hold on to it, but I disconnected at
Yeah,
some
yeah.
point. So
Okay, good enough. All right, Stacy, it's your chance to react to the responses.
I think a lot of that is valid. The one thing that, as far as maybe I should next week. I'll read or whenever I jump on here. So the first fairy tale or the first story chapter is like a solid fairy tale. So you're really brought into this fairy tale world. And then it weaves itself back into the real world, right? So I guess I should have maybe explained that just to not to level out people's expectations of what this chapter was going to be about. And no, but I do get the disconnect. Like, I have to think about how to like fix that part of it. So, but I do grant that, right? But the notes that it wasn't the exposition was very helpful. That it was something like, right? That's kind of the feeling that I was getting. Anyway, it is always good to get input to get a new look at your piece.
Right. Thank you. All right. So this is what we're going to do real quick here, kind of to wrap things up. I'm going to go through everybody that's here. Ash had to drop off, and that's unfortunate. But we're going to just kind of introduce ourselves. I should have done this at the beginning, but we're going to get it here so that it's on the recording, and introduce ourselves, what we are writing, what we're working on, what we have published, what we're trying to promote. I'll start with myself. I'm Neil Christensen. I write noir, vigilante thrillers. My first two books, Dark White and Malcolm Karma Cold Turkey, are both widely available. Malcolm Karma Cold Turkey is available also on Kindle Unlimited. And I'm also the host of BookTube Writers Group. And we will be back next week with a prompt. I will have a prompt up tomorrow for next week's writers group. And Stacy, can you go ahead and give us a little intro to yourself?
Yeah, no, but I was having a question. That was more why I was waving my hand not to go first. Are you going back to prompts, or are you gonna stick
So
with
the way I think I'm going to do this is that we will do prompts primarily, but basically what I'm going to focus on, or what I'm going to try to do, is the last week of every month. So it's hard because we're starting kind of mid-month, but I'll still do it this month. The last meeting of the month, whatever that is, we will have it be work in progress, or whatever. Like if you're not working on something currently, you can bring whatever you just want to share and get feedback on. But the last week of the month will be works in progress, and the idea then is to say, like, not necessarily to say out loud to the group, but to like bring in what you've picked up from the group during the month, like the feedback you've gotten, because the idea of the prompt is to like work on a craft specific thing and have that generalized feedback help you on your work in progress, right? It's to say, oh, I learned this from this prompt, or I learned this from the feedback on this prompt, and I'm going to generalize that information and then use that in evaluating and continuing my work in progress. So at the end of the month, we'll do a work in progress week, and you can kind of like take what you've gotten from the group and like bring your work in progress and how that's helped you. So there will be a work in progress. So if you say there's 4 weeks in a month, like on average.
No,
like,
I get it. I mean, yeah, no. Cool. Down and Dirty, I'm Stacy. I write fairy tales, esque realism, whatever. And that's about it. I don't know. My day job is nurse.
All right. Kara.
Yes.
Now
Kara.
I've got it. Now I'm like in my own head about it. Like, Kara.
So,
wait, is that wrong?
Okay. My nickname as a kid was Care Bear. That might help you if you can remember that. Okay. Yes. My name is Kara Blaine. I write fantasy and romantic fantasy. I have a lot of books out. I'm not even going to show them all. This is my 11th release that I am promoting, releasing, launching, whatever, on Kickstarter right now. It is a Little Red Riding Hood inspired romantic fantasy, urban fantasy called Token of a Wolf. And the piece I shared tonight is from book 2 in this duology. So I also have Lux's Lullaby trilogy, Curse of the Soul Collector, a novella called Mateo that's in the Curse of the Soul Collector world, several YA fantasy books. I'm going to leave it at that.
All right. Wolf, tell us about your book.
I'm back again. My name is Wolf Lovelace. I write. Hold on, my brain train crashed and had 5 sentences all jammed together. I gotta unlodge them. This always happens to me, everybody. I'm Wolf Lovelace. I wrote Shadow Game: The Silent Scream. It is on Kindle. It only has an ebook. It is book 1 of a series, and it asks basically the question: is a bystander culpable for the criminal or violent acts that are done onto others? Yeah, I can actually say the word crime, everybody. Okay, we're good.
You can say whatever you want, Wolf.
I know, right? So Shadow Game book 1 is already out. It is part of a series, and I'm working on Shadow Game book 2, which discusses the phenomenon that happens oftentimes where an individual who is attractive by the normal standards, basically white and pretty, often takes the limelight in media in comparison to individuals who are black and othered. And then my other project that I am working on is basically about how we treat warriors or soldiers as disposable, and how we perpetuate their image without really caring about their personhood. So that's what Wolf does. Wolf does anti-establishment big think books. So
All right. And I have read Silent Scream, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is unusual. It is different. It will challenge you, but it is a excellent, excellent book. Sophie.
Hello. So I'm Sophie, originally from LA, live in Santa Fe now. I have a YouTube channel that I'm trying to get off the ground. Was a filmmaker for 20 to 30 years. Got lung cancer, almost died from it, still fighting it, but realized that life is short and I gotta get my the stories that have been in my head forever out onto paper as part of my legacy. I'm also an artist daughter. Both my parents are artists, and so I'm curating all their work as well. And Jim Morrison was my godfather, and that's why I put him in that preface.
Well, Sophie, it has been so exciting to have you join our group, and I hope to see you again next time and in the future. We'd love to see you as a permanent member of the group. And I think that's it. There's nobody else that needs to talk about themselves. Oh, wait. Okay. There is Scott.
I am the redheaded stepchild of the BookTube writers group. My name is Scott Roche. You can find information about all of my works at scottroche.com. That's SCOTTROCHE. And I am releasing short fiction over on Substack. You can find that at Roche's Omniverse, all one word, .substack.com.
And I just want to say that Scott and I give each other shit like constantly. And I am, the worst of it. I absolutely like goat Scott all the time. But Scott is an incredibly talented writer, and I love his work. And he has done some of the most heartfelt. We did a piece on Book Talk Writers Group where I asked people to make Sean Hines, who is a regular and will certainly show up here later. He wasn't feeling well today. I did talk to him today. He wasn't feeling well. But I asked people to make Sean into a villain in their story. And Scott wrote the most fun piece that I think has ever been submitted to any of my writers groups. It was beautiful. It was fun. It was funny. It was sentimental. And Scott is a very talented writer. So even though I give him shit, do not think for a moment that I don't respect him greatly. He is. I literally was begging him to show up here today because it wouldn't have been right without him. So
and
Neela,
you are like my much, 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 much older brother.
It's true. It is very true. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This was a fun first night. I will post a prompt tomorrow. I'll do it on TikTok too, just because we're all still transitioning. But we will be back here next Thursday at 7 p.m. Central with a prompt-based post, and we'll go from there. But thank you so much to everyone who joined me, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm waving in spirit.